Picture a room so beautiful it could make you weep. Now fill it with wallpaper saturated in arsenic. Add curtains dyed with lead compounds, a dressing table covered in powders that contain mercury and bismuth and ground white lead, and a wardrobe 3 rooms wide full of gowns that are, in a very real and very measurable sense, slowly killing the woman who wears them. Add a bedroom ceiling painted in the most fashionable shade of green money can buy in 1887, a green so vivid and so poisonous that in damp weather, when the plaster breathes, invisible clouds of arsenical gas drift down onto the woman sleeping beneath it. She doesn't know. Her doctor doesn't know either. Or if he does, he doesn't tell her, because the wallpaper is imported from France and cost $400 a roll, and her husband chose it himself. And some things you simply do not say. That's a Fifth Avenue mansion in New York City, October of 1887. Magnificent. Marble-floored, mirror-lined, reported on in Harper's Bazaar, and envied by 3/4 of the country. A place where you could breakfast on terrapin soup, chilled oysters, and French champagne at 10 in the morning, and attend the Metropolitan Opera in a box costing more than a working family earns in 5 years by evening, dressed in 40 pounds of silk and whalebone and dyed fabric that has been, quietly, systematically poisoning you since the moment it was delivered. We're going back there tonight. Not as tourists looking at the gilded banisters and the imported Flemish tapestries and the Tiffany glass in the conservatory. We're living it. One day, one woman, one world. Everything she would have seen, smelled, swallowed, endured and survived, or almost survived. So I make these history stories, and honestly I have no clue if anyone actually sleeps to them, or if you're all just people who enjoy hearing about the elaborate and surprisingly effective methods that the 19th century used to poison its wealthiest women while calling it beauty, health, and refinement. Either way, subscribe if you want. Get comfortable. Turn the light off. Here we go. Your eyes open to darkness. For half a second, maybe less, you don't know where you are. You don't know what year it is. You don't know what your name is, or what you owe to whom, or why your lower back aches the way it does. A deep grinding ache that starts just above your hips and radiates outward like a bruise pressed from the inside. Then it hits you. The smell. It's not one smell, it's layers. There's the chemical sweetness of the hair pomade on Mrs. Harrington's brush. A pomade containing, among other things, lead acetate. Though nobody calls it that. They call it Madame Rowley's toilet mask compound, and it costs $2.50 a jar. There's the sharper smell of the powder on the dressing table, bismuth subnitrate and zinc oxide cut with white lead and scented with violet. And you've been opening that box every morning for 14 months, and your fingertips have, if you knew to look for it, a slight persistent greyness that doesn't wash off. There's the smell of the gas jet still burning low in the hall outside. They were left on all night because Mrs. Harrington doesn't like darkness. And the faint coal and copper smell that comes up through the heating pipes from the furnace 4 floors below. And underneath all of it, the human smell, the sleep smell, the wool and perspiration and closed room smell of a house that has 23 people living in it, and not nearly enough windows open for the season. Welcome to 327 Fifth Avenue, New York City, October the 14th, 1887. You're lying on a narrow iron bed in a room 8 feet wide and 11 feet long on the 4th floor, directly above Mrs. Harrington's own suite, which is in turn directly above the drawing room, which is in turn directly above the dining room, which is in turn above the kitchen, which is in turn above a wine cellar that holds 600 bottles of French Bordeaux, organised by vintage. The wine is probably worth more than the combined wages of everyone who sleeps on the 4th floor. There are 4 of you up here. You and Bridget, who is the head housemaid, and Nora, who does the laundry for the family's clothing only and nothing else, because Mrs. Harrington's personal laundry is a specialised matter, and an empty bed that belongs to Miss Jennings, who was the previous lady's maid and who left in August under circumstances nobody discusses anymore. Your name is Clara Moss. You're 22 years old. You arrived here 14 months ago from Poughkeepsie with a letter of recommendation from the Reverend Aldrich, whose wife had been a Barnard, connected distantly to half of proper New York society, and with exactly 1 good black dress, 1 pair of presentable boots, and the understanding that you had been hired to make a woman's life beautiful, and that you would do this invisibly, quietly, and perfectly, or you would be doing something else entirely somewhere far less comfortable. Back home, everyone said New York would make your fortune. They weren't entirely wrong. They just weren't entirely right either. The church bells are already ringing. Not 1 church, several. St. Patrick's Cathedral is 4 blocks north and 3 avenues west, and its bells carry clearly in the October air, big bronze voices that have been tolling the hours since the cathedral opened 4 years ago in 1879, the largest Catholic church in the United States, visible from half the island on a clear day. Closer is the 5th Avenue Presbyterian, whose bells are smaller and more polite. Somewhere further east, past the L train tracks, other bells are ringing for other congregations entirely. 6 o'clock in the morning. The sun is not up yet. The sky outside your single window is the colour of old pewter, and the horse traffic on 5th Avenue has already begun. Hooves on stone, the rattle of delivery wagons, the occasional sharper sound of a private carriage moving faster than it should. You need to get up. Mrs. Harrington wakes at 7:30, not a minute before and not a minute after, and before she wakes the room must be ready. The fire if it's needed, and this morning, this October morning, it is needed, because the temperature outside is 41 degrees, and the heating pipes are still warming up from the night, must already be burning when she opens her eyes. Her water must be hot but not scalding. Her morning robe must be warming near the fire. Her breakfast tray, handled by the kitchen, carried up by a housemaid, but reviewed and arranged by you, must be on the side table, the silver correct, the linen correct, the single rosebud in the small crystal vase fresh and not yet fully open, because Mrs. Harrington prefers buds to blooms, which is a preference you discovered by presenting her with a full rose on your 3rd morning in this house, and receiving a silence so pointed it could cut glass. Your feet touch the floor. The wood is cold through your cotton stockings. Bridget is still asleep in the other bed, breathing with the deep, unconcerned rhythm of someone who doesn't go on duty until 7. Lucky, you used to think. You don't think that anymore. You've seen what the housemaid's hands look like after a year of lye soap and scrubbing brushes, and you understand that every position in this house has its own particular form of damage. You dress quickly, in the dark, which you've gotten very good at. Black dress, white apron, white cap, all of it correct, none of it ornamental, all of it designed to make you visible enough to be useful and invisible enough not to be noticed. That is the paradox of your position. You must be present at all times and apparent at no time. You must know everything that happens in Mrs. Harrington's rooms and communicate nothing of it. You must anticipate every need and never be seen anticipating. The hat must appear ready. The water must appear hot. The powder must appear on the brush. Magic performed every morning by a 22-year-old woman from Poughkeepsie who's not slept more than 6 hours since she arrived, and who's not had a full Sunday afternoon to herself in 3 months. The hall outside is lit by 2 gas jets turned low, and you move through it quietly, your boots making almost no sound on the runner carpet. You've learned exactly which boards creak and which don't. It took about a week. And descend the back stairs to the kitchen to collect Mrs. Harrington's tray. The kitchen at this hour is already running. Cook has been up since 5. 2 kitchen maids are already working, 1 rolling pastry, 1 at the range. The kitchen smells of coffee and rendered fat and hot iron, and the slightly acidic smell of the tin-lined copper pots being wiped down after last night's dinner. "Morning tray's there," Cook says, not looking up, because Cook doesn't look up. Not at you, not at anyone below the housekeeper in the hierarchy. The tray is covered with a linen cloth. You check it. Toast, precisely cut. A small pot of Mrs. Harrington's particular coffee blend, which comes from a shop on Broadway that imports it directly from Guatemala. A single, soft-boiled egg, 4 minutes exactly, which you verified with Cook in your 2nd week by standing in the kitchen with a pocket watch and observing 3 consecutive attempts. The egg must be 4 minutes. The one time it was 4.5 minutes, Mrs. Harrington sent it back without a word, and that silence travelled all the way down to the kitchen, and Cook was difficult for 2 days. You carry the tray up, 4 flights of back stairs. You do not spill the coffee. You have not spilled the coffee in 14 months, which is a record that cost you approximately 6 months of learning to walk like you have something balanced on your head even when you don't. Mrs. Adeline Cornelius Harrington, née van der Berg, is 31 years old. She is the wife of Frederick Harrington, who made his fortune in railroad consolidation and has spent the last 7 years spending it, and she is one of approximately 400 people in New York City who constitute what the newspapers call society, with a capital S, and what the other 399 people in that group call simply us. She is not the wealthiest woman in this set. She is not the most beautiful. She is, by most assessments, the best dressed, which is its own category of achievement requiring its own category of expertise and its own category of suffering. You open the door to her suite quietly. The room is large, 22 feet by 30. You know this because you have, in idle moments, measured it in footsteps and decorated in a style that the newspapers call French Renaissance Revival, and that you privately think of as everything expensive arranged carefully. The walls are covered in that wallpaper. The green wallpaper. It is called Shields green, though nobody in this house knows that name. It is a green so saturated and particular that it vibrates slightly when you look at it in bright light. A green that was achievable in 1887 only through the use of copper acetoarsenite, which is, to put it plainly, arsenic. The paper was hung in 1884. It has been breathing arsenical compounds into this room for 3 years. Mrs. Harrington has in that time developed what her doctor calls a sensitive constitution, characterized by persistent headaches, intermittent nausea, a peculiar tiredness that sleep does not seem to address, and a pallor that her friends admire and her husband has begun to worry about. The pallor, at least, is fashionable. You set the tray on the side table with no sound. You check the fire. It has caught good. And you lay out the morning robe, which is cream silk trimmed with Belgian lace and warm from hanging near the fireplace for 20 minutes. You straighten the bottles on the dressing table, the hair tonic, the complexion cream, the powder box, the small blue bottle of belladonna eye drops that Mrs. Harrington has been using since 1885 on the advice of her friend Mrs. Whittaker, who read about it in a beauty column, and whose eyes are, as a result, in a permanent state of dilated glamour. Belladonna is Atropa belladonna. It is a deadly plant. The eye drops dilate the pupils to an appealing size, large, luminous, romantically unreadable, and in doing so also make it difficult to focus on anything near or middle distance, make bright light physically painful, and with sustained use cause a host of symptoms that are currently being attributed to Mrs. Harrington's sensitive constitution rather than to the alkaloid she's been dropping directly onto her eyes 3 times a week. She doesn't know. Because you read. You found a medical text in Mr. Harrington's library. The library is one of the rooms you clean, and the books are on open shelves. And you read the passage about atropine and ocular application, and then stood very still for a moment in the library with the book open in your hands. You didn't say anything. To say something would require a theory of your role in this house that doesn't quite apply. You are the lady's maid. You arrange the bottles. You are not the doctor. You're not the conscience. You're the woman who makes everything look correct and then disappears. You make the fire correct. You make the tray correct. You wait by the window, not directly in front of it, off to the side, present but not intrusive. And at 7:30 precisely, Mrs. Harrington's eyes open. There is a moment, maybe 2 seconds, where she looks at the ceiling. The green ceiling. The same ceiling she has looked at every morning for 3 years. You watch her face arrange itself, the small sequence of adjustments that moves her from sleeping person to public person, from Adeline to Mrs. Harrington. It takes, you've counted, approximately 12 seconds. By second 13 she's sitting up, and by second 15 she has looked at the tray, and by second 17 she has looked at you, and her expression has completed its transition to the one she wears for all staff, pleasant, impersonal, efficient as a clean instrument. "Good morning, Clara." "Good morning, Ma'am. Is it cold today?" You've already looked out the window and noted the way the coachman below was hunched into his collar. 40 degrees, Ma'am, possibly colder by afternoon. She nods. She pours her coffee herself, which most women in her position would not do, would ring for it to be poured. But Mrs. Harrington has a series of small private habits that you think are left over from before the money, from her own family's comparative modesty before her marriage, and pouring her own morning coffee is one of them. You like her slightly for it, which is information you keep entirely to yourself. She drinks. She eats half the toast. The egg this morning is 4 minutes exactly, and she opens it without comment, which means it's correct. "I'll need the Greenworth today," she says, setting down the cup. "The opera tonight, Mrs. Whittaker's box." The Greenworth. You know this dress. You know exactly which green dress she means, because there are currently 11 evening gowns in the dressing room, and 2 of them are green. The one she means is the Worth, from Charles Frederick Worth's house in Paris, which is to say the most important fashion house in the world in 1887, the house that dresses empresses and queens and the wealthiest women of New York, the house whose annual bills for Mrs. Harrington run to approximately $6,000. The Greenworth is 2 years old, purchased on the Harringtons' last Paris trip, and it is made from a silk dyed in a colour called emerald that is achieved in the French textile industry of the 1880s through the use of arsenical dyes. The dress is beautiful. The dress is, in a technical sense, that nobody involved in its creation or its wearing would easily believe quite dangerous. The dress is not the only dangerous thing in Mrs. Harrington's wardrobe, but it is the one she wants to wear tonight. "Of course, ma'am," you say. "I'll press it this morning." And you will press it with a hot iron, which will release whatever arsenical compounds are embedded in the dye, which will drift upward toward your face in the steam, which is something you will do, and have done, and will do again, because the dress must be correct and the opera is tonight, and Mrs. Whittaker's box seats 12, and there are 8 women invited who will all be wearing Worth gowns of their own. And the colour and condition of those gowns matters in ways that have nothing to do with beauty, and everything to do with the social calculus that operates this city like a machine. Let's talk about that machine for a moment, because you need to understand what you've walked into. You need to understand what the Gilded Age actually was, not the photographs of it, not the marble staircases, not the word gilded, which was Mark Twain's word, from his 1873 novel, chosen specifically because gilded means covered in a thin layer of gold that hides the metal underneath. The Gilded Age ran, roughly, from the end of the Civil War in 1865 to the turn of the century in 1900. It was an era of almost incomprehensible wealth accumulation by a very small number of people. The Vanderbilts, the Astors, the Harringtons, the Belmonts, the Rockefellers, and almost incomprehensible poverty for a very large number of people living within walking distance of their mansions. In 1887, the year you are here, New York City has a population of approximately 1.5 million people. Of those, 400 families control more wealth than the remaining 1,499,600 people combined. That's not a political statement. That's arithmetic. The gap between Mrs. Harrington's life and the life of the woman who sells violets from a basket on the corner of 42nd Street is so vast that they might as well be living in different centuries, and in some ways they are. And yet the women at the top of this machine are not, it turns out, as comfortable as they appear. They are comfortable in the way that a very beautiful cage is comfortable. They are comfortable in the way that a life organised entirely around performance is comfortable, which is to say, not very, and not in any way that shows from the outside. But you need to get moving. The dress needs pressing. The hair appointment is at 10. Monsieur Duval comes to the house. He doesn't take clients in a salon, because Mrs. Harrington does not go to salons. Salons are for women who cannot afford to have their hairdresser come to them. And after the hair, there is a morning call at the Whittakers on 68th Street. And after that, a fitting at Redfern's on Broadway for the new evening coat. And after that, the opera tonight. And between now and all of that, there is the morning routine, which takes, when done correctly, 2 hours. 2 hours every morning. To prepare one woman for the day, you help Mrs. Harrington to the dressing table, which is to say you stand at exactly the right distance to be useful if needed, and not intrusive if not, while she settles into the velvet chair. The dressing table is mahogany, 5 feet wide, its surface covered in the organised apparatus of female beauty as practised in 1887. On the left, the brushes, 3 sizes of hairbrush, all silver-backed, the bristles real boar, a fine-toothed comb, a wider comb for the chignon. On the right, the bottles, the hair tonic which contains, among other things, a small quantity of mercuric chloride, because mercury has been used as a hair treatment since the Renaissance, and nobody has yet managed to convincingly connect it to the headaches, the complexion water, the glycerin and rosewater blend that Mrs. Harrington applies to her hands every morning. Her hands, which are, despite everything, not her most admired feature. They're slightly too large, which is something she has known since she was 12 years old, and which costs her more than you will ever know. In the centre, the powder box. This is the important one. The face powder that Mrs. Harrington applies every morning is a compound of zinc oxide, rice powder, and bismuth subnitrate, tinted to a very particular shade of cool ivory that her complexion requires for the evening, and lightly scented with violet. It was mixed to her specification by a chemist on 23rd Street, who has been providing it for 3 years. It is, by the standards of 1887, a reasonably safe formulation. The previous version, which she used until 1884, contained a significant quantity of white lead, because lead-based face powders has been fashionable in Europe for 300 years, and habits of that magnitude die slowly. She switched because a friend, not a doctor, a friend, mentioned that the lead was perhaps not entirely beneficial, and the chemist reformulated. The reformulation removed most of the lead, not all. You open the powder box. The smell is violet and chalk and something underneath that you can't name. Faintly metallic, something that lives in the back of your throat after you've been in this room for an hour. You have been in this room every morning for 14 months. Your throat has that something in it all the time now. You stopped noticing it around month 6. The morning routine is a ritual, and you perform it with the precision of a ritual. First, the face washing. Mrs. Harrington washes her face in water that is warm but not hot. Hot water opens pores, which is fine in theory, but the morning requires closed pores, controlled surfaces, the face presenting its most even and corrected front, using a soft flannel cloth and a glycerin soap that was made in England and cost 40 cents a cake and lasts 2 weeks. The water is poured from the pitcher on the washstand, where you've already established that it is the correct temperature by testing it against your inner wrist. A test you perform so quickly and so naturally now that it has become unconscious. A reflex, something your body does while your mind is elsewhere. Then the complexion cream. This is applied with a spatula, glass-handled, very thin, across both cheekbones and forehead and chin, and blended with a cloth in small circular motions. The cream is pale yellow and smells of almond and something else. Lanolin, possibly. Or perhaps it's the mercury component that has a smell. You're not sure. You've never been certain. You apply it and blend it and stand back, and the skin looks immediately clearer, smoother, more even. That's what the cream is for. To correct, to smooth, to present a surface that reads as effortless. The effort is in your hands. The effortlessness is on her face. After the cream, the powder. You load the powder puff. It is large, the size of a small fist made from real down, and apply it in presses, not swipes, because Mrs. Harrington's complexion is best served by pressing motions rather than sweeping ones, a detail you learned by experiment in month 2 and have not deviated from since. The powder settles. The face changes. It becomes slightly less specific, slightly less particular, more composed, more finished, more correct. It looks like the portraits. It looks like what she's supposed to look like. The hair work is next, and this is the longest part, and this is where Monsieur Duval would normally be involved, but today is a preparatory day only. Duval comes at 10 for the full evening arrangement, so you do the morning dressing yourself, which takes approximately 45 minutes and requires your full attention and both your hands and a small amount of the focused silence that is its own form of effort. Mrs. Harrington's hair is dark brown, naturally wavy and abundant. This is to say, it is approximately the right amount of hair for the fashionable silhouette of 1887, which requires significant volume at the top and back of the head, achieved through a combination of real hair, false hair, the pieces, made from real human hair, purchased from a dealer on Broome Street who sources them from women in the slums who sell their hair when they need the money, which is often, and enough pins to constitute a small arsenal. You section the hair with a wide comb working from the bottom up. You secure the lower sections with pins. You build the structure incrementally, the way a mason builds a wall, each piece supporting the next, the whole thing dependent on the integrity of every part. A wrongly placed pin can mean 20 minutes of correction. A section that doesn't take the curl correctly means another pass with the iron, which means heat, which means time, which means the careful management of both. You don't talk while you work. This is important. There are ladies' maids who talk, fill the silence with small information, news of the household, observations, and there are those who are silent, and the silent ones are generally preferred because silence has a quality that is easy to mistake for discretion, and discretion is worth more in this house than almost any other attribute. What you know, you keep. What you see, you don't say. The dressing room is a sealed world. What happens in it belongs to it. What happens in it this morning is that Mrs. Harrington looks at her face in the mirror the way she looks at it every morning. Not with vanity, you've noticed, or not exactly, more with the focused assessment of someone checking a mechanism and says after a moment, "Thinner." She's not wrong. There is a shadow under her left cheekbone that wasn't there 6 months ago. Her face is changing very slowly in the direction of too thin, and the green wallpaper has been in this room for 3 years, and her doctor calls it a sensitive constitution, and she's been feeling unwell since approximately the spring of 1885, when she was last photographed, and when her friends told her she looked magnificent, and she was very pale in the photograph, and the paleness was admired. "Your colour is very good today, ma'am," you say, because this is what you're supposed to say, and because it is technically true. The powder gives good colour, and because the alternative requires a conversation that you do not have the standing to begin. She looks at you in the mirror for a moment. She has a way of looking at you, not unkindly, but assessingly, the way she looks at everything, with a kind of proprietary ownership that you have learned to receive without reaction. "The Pierce girl," she says, which is not in response to anything but is the beginning of a thought. "Have you heard?" "No, ma'am." "She collapsed at the Wendell Ball last Thursday, right in the middle of the second quadrille." A pause. "She's watching your hands in the mirror the way the pin goes in." The doctor says exhaustion. You pin the next section. "That's unfortunate, ma'am." "She's 24. Another pause. "She was wearing the green doucet, spent the whole evening in it." She says this in the way that people mention the weather, casually, informationally, as if the connection between the dress and the collapse is not something she's thinking about, because she isn't. She's not thinking about it because the connection has not been proposed to her. The connection between arsenical dyes in evening gowns and the headaches and nausea and weakness of the women who wear them is not a connection that 1887 New York society has made in any formal way. There are a few physicians who suspect it. There is a German chemist, Wilhelm Skay, who published a report in the 1870s on arsenical wallpapers. There is ongoing debate in the medical literature, but the debate is in the medical literature, not in the dressing rooms of Fifth Avenue. And Mrs. Harrington's doctor is a fashionable physician on Madison Avenue who drives a very good carriage and does not read German. "The Pierce girl is delicate," Mrs. Harrington adds. This closes the topic. Delicacy is a medical category in 1887, and it belongs entirely to women, and it explains a great deal. You finish the hair at 8:45. It is correct. You step back, look at it in the light from 2 directions, check the pins for security, there are 27 of them, and then step further back and look at the whole picture. The hair frames the face, powdered and creamed, receives the hair. The whole thing is constructed, assembled, specific. It is the portrait of Mrs. Frederick Harrington, and it is ready to be seen. Now the dressing. And here is where the morning routine moves into territory that is, in the most physical sense, difficult. The corset goes on first. This is not a metaphor. The corset literally goes on before everything else, because the corset determines the shape of everything else. Every dress in Mrs. Harrington's wardrobe is cut to fit over a corseted body, which means a body that has been mechanically reshaped to conform to the silhouette required by fashion in 1887. The silhouette of 1887 requires a waist. Specifically, it requires a waist measurement in a dressed woman of society of between 19 and 22 inches. Mrs. Harrington's natural waist, uncorseted as she wakes in the morning, measures 26 inches. The corset her measurements require is a straight-fronted model with steel busk closure and 24 steel bones and a lace at the back that, when properly tightened, will reduce that measurement by 4 to 5 inches. You retrieve the corset from its form in the dressing room. It is a Madame Iona, made to measure, which means it was fitted to Mrs. Harrington's specific body over 3 sessions with the corsetiere, each session involving measurements and adjustments, and the careful consideration of how much compression is comfortable and how much is necessary. And those 2 measurements are different enough that the corsetiere has built, essentially, 2 slightly different versions of this corset. The morning one, which is slightly looser, and the evening one, which is the real thing. This is the morning one. The morning one is looser. You hold it and Mrs. Harrington raises her arm slightly, and you settle it into position around her torso, the busk at the front, the lacing at the back. You begin to tighten the lace from the waist, working upward and downward simultaneously, the way you were taught, the way that distributes the tension most evenly. Mrs. Harrington puts one hand lightly on the dressing table, not gripping it, just steadying. You tighten. You feel the resistance of the bones against the fabric against her body. You feel the lace in your hands, the weight and resistance of it. You tighten further. A soft exhalation from Mrs. Harrington. Not a gasp, not a complaint. Something between the 2 that is too quiet to name. You pause. More, she says. You tighten more. Another inch of reduction. The waist is now approximately 22 inches, the morning measurement. By this evening, in the evening corset, with Duvel's coiffure and the green worth and the evening slippers and the long gloves and the Harrington diamonds at her throat, she will be 20 inches at the waist. This is known. This is planned. This is what the dress requires, what the corset does to the body beneath it. The organs displaced downward, the floating ribs gradually deformed, the diaphragm compressed so that breathing requires a conscious effort, the stomach so repositioned that a large meal produces something very like suffocation, is not something that gets discussed during the dressing process. It is known in a general way by most women who wear corsets, and it is considered in a general way an acceptable cost. Physicians argue about it in journals. Some say the corset is dangerous, many say it is fine, that the body adapts, that the waist is naturally compressible. Mrs. Harrington's doctor is in the latter camp, and he has been her doctor for 6 years, and she trusts him. His practice is very fashionable. You tie the lace in a bow that will hold but can be opened quickly. You smooth the corset cover, a soft cotton garment, plain, practical, worn between the corset and the dress to prevent marking, and then begin the petticoats. The petticoats of 1887 are structural as much as protective. They have their own inner architecture of steel, horsehair and stiffened cotton, the bustle still present, though smaller than it was at its peak in 1882 to 1883. The whole system designed to support and project the back of the skirt in the specific shape that the fashion dictates this season. The bustle petticoat settles around the hips with a small mechanical sound, the kind of sound that steel armatures make when they find their equilibrium. Mrs. Harrington barely notices. She has been wearing this every day for 15 years. The dress for the morning is a day dress, a calling costume, appropriate for the morning call at the Whitakers and the fitting at Redfern's and whatever else the morning requires. It is deep blue wool, smartly made with a narrow collar and fitted sleeves and a skirt that falls correctly over the petticoat structure. You help her into it. One sleeve, then the other, the settling of the shoulders, the buttoning down the back. 14 buttons, each one small, each one requiring the button hook that lives in the third drawer of the dressing table. You button from the top down. You count the buttons as you go, not aloud, in your head. Because if you lose count, you'll miss one and the back will be wrong and the lines will be off, and that will be visible. And things that are visible when they shouldn't be are the primary professional failure of a lady's maid. 14 buttons, all correct. You step back, you look, the whole picture. The hair, the face, the dress, the posture, the corset behind the dress, the petticoats behind the corset, the whole constructed and assembled figure that is Mrs. Frederick Harrington ready to meet her morning. She looks at herself in the long mirror. She turns slightly to the left, slightly to the right. She examines the back in the hand mirror you hold up. Her face is neutral and assessing. The back hook, she says. You look. The third from bottom button is very slightly off-centered. You have missed a fraction of a millimeter's error in the alignment of the fabric at the button. She has caught it in a mirror, at this distance, in this light. You correct it. You take approximately 15 seconds. You step back again. She nods. One small movement of the head. This is approval. It is the only form of approval you receive, and it is enough. And you have been trained, by experience, by necessity, to receive it as if it were a great deal more. The collar brooch, she says. The collar brooch is a small gold oval set with seed pearls and a central sapphire. It lives in the top drawer of the jewellery chest, which is locked with a key Mrs. Harrington carries on a small chain, and which you are handed to open at need. You open it, take the brooch, close and lock the chest, return the key. You pin the brooch at the collar, centred, catching exactly the right amount of the fold, the pearl setting flush against the wool. Mrs. Harrington looks at the brooch in the mirror for a moment, then at you. Thank you, Clara. This is the closest thing to personal acknowledgement you will receive today. You have learned, over 14 months, to mean it nothing and feel about it nothing and simply carry it, a small stone in a pocket, weight without content. Of course, Mum, you say, and then you step back and disappear into the efficient background of yourself, and Mrs. Harrington goes down to breakfast, and you go to press the Greenworth gown. The Greenworth gown lives in the dressing room on a padded form covered in a cotton dust sheet. You lift the sheet and examine the gown in the light, the morning light from the single dressing room window, which faces east and is full and good at this hour. The gown is extraordinary. There is no honest way to look at it and not register its particular kind of power. The silk, the colour, the construction, the weight of the embellishment at the cuffs and along the deep hem, Worth gowns are architectural in the same way that cathedrals are architectural, built to a scale and a precision that exceeds their function, made to be seen and to mean something about the person inside them. The colour is the thing. Emerald. Not the green of nature, not the green of Irish fields or spring leaves, the green of the jewel. A green so saturated it seems to generate its own light, to assert its own presence. A green that in 1887 achieved at this depth and this clarity in silk requires chemistry that is, putting it plainly, poisonous. You know this. You've known it for approximately 6 months since you read the pamphlet. The pamphlet was published in 1876 by the Board of Health in Massachusetts. It was titled Poisonous Colours in Dress, and it concerned arsenical dyes in green fabrics. It was not widely distributed. It was not fashionable reading. You found a copy of it in a second-hand bookshop on Greenwich Street, where you sometimes spend your Thursday afternoons. The Thursday afternoons when Mrs. Harrington is at her weekly card party, and you have 3 hours that belong theoretically to you. You read the pamphlet in the shop standing, and then you paid 3 cents for it and brought it home and read it twice more, and then lay on your narrow bed looking at the ceiling and thought about your fingertips, which have the greyness. The gown must be pressed. You set up the ironing board. It folds out from the wall. A clever arrangement. Everything in this dressing room is a clever arrangement. The whole room is a machine for the production of Mrs. Harrington's appearance, and heat the iron on the small gas ring. While the iron heats, you lay the gown carefully, skirt section only, because that's the section that has picked up the faint storage crease you need to address. The silk is cool and heavy in your hands. The colour is vivid even in morning light. Up close, the fabric has a slight sheen that shifts as you move it, emerald to something darker, deeper, the way a gemstone shifts. The iron is ready. You lay a pressing cloth between the iron and the silk, which you always do, which protects the fabric from direct heat. The steam rises immediately. It rises toward your face. It has a very faint smell. The pressing steam from this gown, something you noticed the first time you pressed it, and have noticed each of the 4 subsequent times. It smells like nothing you can name. Metal and something else, something that lives at the back of the throat. You press the section. You work quickly and precisely. The crease releases. The silk settles smooth, falls correctly the way it is meant to. You move to the next section. The steam rises again. You're not frightened exactly. You're engaged in an activity that has a smell you cannot name, and a pamphlet says you should perhaps not breathe. But the dress must be pressed, and the opera is tonight, and you are the lady's maid, and this is what you do. So you breathe shallowly, and work quickly, and finish in 12 minutes, and hang the gown back on its form and cover it again. Then you open the window for a few minutes, which helps, which you also always do now, after the pressing, which is the only concession you have made. By 9:15 the dressing room is set for the evening, the greenworth on its form, the evening corset, the real one, narrower, more constructed, on its own form beside it, the jewellery chest in position, the key in your pocket, the evening gloves, white kid, 22 buttons each, laid flat in their tissue paper, the evening slippers, satin, dyed to match the gown, everything prepared, everything ready, everything correct. You close the dressing room and go downstairs for your own breakfast, which you take in the servants' hall, a room on the basement level with a long table and benches, and a hierarchy of seating so rigid and so understood that it is never discussed. The housekeeper, Mrs. Fenwick, at the head, then Mr. Dawson, the butler, then you. The lady's maid occupies a specific position, above the housemaids, below the housekeeper, distinguished from the cook's hierarchy, which runs parallel, and then Bridget, and then the footmen, and then the kitchen maids at the far end. Breakfast is porridge and bread, and a scraping of butter and tea from a large brown pot. It is not the food upstairs. The Harrington family is breakfasting this morning on shirred eggs with cream, Finn and Haddie in a cream sauce, small cups of consommé, rolls, and the Guatemalan coffee. You know this because you passed through the dining room on your way down and saw the arrangement before the family arrived, and also because you have worked in this house for 14 months and you know what they eat. You eat the porridge. It is fine, it is hot, and it is enough, and it is not something you spend energy resenting, because resentment is a luxury that costs more than it returns, and you have concluded over the course of your life so far that the arithmetic of resentment never pays out. What you do think about, eating the porridge, is the green dress on its form upstairs, the steam with the smell, your fingertips, the Pierce girl who collapsed at the Wendell ball wearing the green doucet. You're quiet, says Bridget, who is sitting next to you. Bridget is from County Cork and has been in service since she was 14 and is 26 now, and has opinions about almost everything, delivered at low volume and with precision, like small stones thrown in darkness. Are ye thinking, you say, about nothing? Bridget looks at you with a look she has, which is the look of someone who has heard a great many things described as nothing. She returns to her bread. Mrs. Fenwick wants the second-floor hall runner beaten today, she says, by way of changing the subject. I'm sure she does. Not your job, obviously, just saying. I know, you say, and you do know, because the division of labour in this house is delineated with the precision of a treaty, and the runner beating is absolutely not your job. And Bridget is telling you this not because she thinks you'll forget, but because the small exchange of information is a form of solidarity in a place where solidarity is otherwise difficult to express. You finish the porridge, you drink the tea, you go back up. The day moves, you're always in motion in it. Present in the dressing room when needed, absent when not, tracking the schedule, the appointments, the requirements. At 9:50, Monsieur Duval arrives. Duval is 38, French in the way that New York Frenchmen are French, thoroughly, performatively, with a slight accent that is slightly more pronounced in rooms with wealthy women, and he is very good at his work. He examines Mrs. Harrington's hair, which you prepared, with the eye of a craftsman examining a foundation. He nods, he begins. What Duval does over the next 2 hours is create a structure on Mrs. Harrington's head that is, by the standards of 1887, a masterpiece. The chignon at the back, built on the false pieces, dressed with a curl that falls to the left side of the neck, pinned with a jet ornament that catches light. The front hair waved. Duval uses his irons with the speed of long practice, each movement exact, the temperature managed by feel, and dressed in the soft waves that frame the face. The whole thing then lacquered, very lightly, with a pomade that sets the hair without stiffening it, which is the technical challenge of the decade and the reason Duval is able to charge what he charges. You stand in the dressing room and observe. You observe because this is educational. The techniques you watch him use are techniques you will need to approximate when Duval is not here. And because observation is part of your position, the surveillance of the process from beginning to end. You also observe because you cannot leave, and because the dressing room is where you are. Duval finishes. The result is perfect. Mrs. Harrington looks at it in the mirror with the assessing look, turns left, turns right, considers. A single curl is lifted infinitesimally. Duval moves it without instruction, before she speaks, because he's been reading this face in this mirror for 2 years and knows the inclination of the jaw before the jaw knows it, and settled into a slightly different position. Better. She stands. Duval collects his cases. He bows. He's one of the few people in Mrs. Harrington's orbit who bows, which she accepts without acknowledgement, because acknowledged deference is more awkward than unacknowledged deference. You will press his day rate when you settle with him at the end of the month, $3 per session, which is $1 more than you earn in 2 days. You have long since stopped calculating these comparisons because they do not have a useful destination. By 11:15, Mrs. Harrington has departed for the Whitakers' morning call in the carriage. The Harrington carriage is a brougham, dark blue, with the Harrington crest on the door, and the 2 horses are matched bays named Mercutio and Juliet by Mr. Harrington's previous coachman, names that have stuck. And you are alone in the dressing room with the evening's appointments. This is the part of your day that is yours, in the sense that no one is directly managing it. You are to prepare for the evening. This is both your job and your time. You sit for a moment, actually sit, in the chair at the dressing table, which you're not technically supposed to do, but which Mrs. Harrington never knows because you're careful about it. And you look at the room, the green gown on its form, the bottles, the powder box, the blue belladonna bottle, the evening corset waiting. You pick up the belladonna bottle and hold it in the light. It is a blue glass bottle, small, elegant, labelled in a fine italic typeface. Madame Rowley's optical enhancement drops, for the enlargement and brightening of the eye. The label does not say what is in it. Labels rarely do in 1887. The laws regarding the labelling of pharmaceutical compounds are limited and unenforced, and the market for beauty preparations is vast and profitable, and largely ungoverned. You could put anything in a blue glass bottle and call it an optical enhancement and sell it to every woman in New York at 50 cents per bottle, and no one would stop you, and many people would thank you if the result was the eyes they wanted. The result of this particular bottle is, in fact, the eyes. The eyes that Mrs. Harrington has in the evenings when she uses the drops, luminous, dark, romantic in the extreme. The kind of eyes that get described in diary entries with phrases like magnificent and otherworldly. The pupils so large in the dimmed gaslit rooms of the opera and the ballroom that the iris is barely visible. The whole eye of vast and appealing darkness that has been, on 3 occasions, described by newspaper society columns as Mrs. Harrington's most remarkable feature. The eyes cost. The focusing problem, the difficulty resolving anything closer than arm's length, is mild in the mornings, more pronounced on the days after use. The light sensitivity is real. Bright sunlight in the morning after an evening with drops is genuinely painful, which Mrs. Harrington mentions as headaches, which she attributes to the opera itself, the heat of the gaslight, the press of bodies, the champagne, not the drops. You set the bottle down. You stand up. There is work to do. The afternoon moves through itself in the specific rhythm of the day before an important evening. You press the gloves. They must be done with a very cool iron, almost no heat, because kid leather will scorch at temperatures that wouldn't trouble fabric. You lay out the evening petticoat, the evening shoes, the evening jewellery in its specific order. The Harrington diamonds live in the safe in the study, and they're brought to the dressing table by Mr. Dawson on evenings when they are required, and tonight they are required. and they will arrive at 6:30 when Mrs. Harrington is back from the Redfern fitting. You prepare the dressing table for the evening toilette, which is different from the morning. Different powders, different techniques, a higher level of finish, because gaslight both forgives certain imperfections and demands compensation for others. Mrs. Harrington returns at 4:15. The morning call at the Whitakers took 2 hours, which is slightly long for a call in this era. Calls are supposed to be 15 minutes by the rules, but the Whitakers are close friends and the rules bend for friendship, especially when the topic under discussion is this evening's opera programme and the logistics of who is sitting where in Mrs. Whitaker's box, and what Mrs. Delacour said to Mrs. Pennington about the new tenor, a matter of some social complexity. The fitting at Redfern's was 1 hour, and produced a note from the tailor that you received at the service entrance. The evening coat will be ready by Thursday, not Friday, because the lining has been changed to a heavier silk at Mrs. Harrington's request. She comes in through the front entrance, never the back, because Mrs. Harrington is not staff. She is the person for whom the front entrance exists, and you meet her in the upstairs hall with her afternoon tea, because by this point in the day she's not eaten since breakfast. The morning call involved only small sandwiches, which she declined because her stomach in the corset cannot manage much in the middle of the day, and tea is what fits. "The Pierce girl," she says again, sitting in the small chair in the sitting room off her bedroom accepting the tea. You're in the doorway, present and not intrusive. "Ma'am?" "I called on them this morning, after the Whitakers." You wait. "She's still in bed. The doctor thinks it's her heart." Mrs. Harrington stirs her tea. 24 years old. She says this with something in her face that is not quite expression, not quite worry, not quite recognition. Something that passes through and leaves no mark. "I'm sorry to hear it, Mum. She's to rest for 6 weeks. Another pause. "At the Pierces? That means no opera, no dinners. 6 weeks in their house in Gramercy Park with nothing to do." She considers this. That might be worse than the illness. She says it as a small wry thing, a light observation about the social cost of convalescence, the kind of thing that gets said in society drawing rooms as comfort or humour or both. And it is meant that way. She is not cruel. But underneath it, underneath the remark about no opera, no dinners, is the architecture of a life so organised around its external performances that the suspension of those performances is genuinely indistinguishable from loss. The Pierce girl in her room in Gramercy Park for 6 weeks is cut off from everything that constitutes her social existence, her purpose, her identity as a particular kind of New York woman. 6 weeks of invisibility in a world that only registers what it can see. That's not a metaphor either. In 1887, a woman in Mrs. Harrington's set who is absent from the social season for 6 weeks is written about, speculated about, visited by a narrowing circle, and replaced in tables and boxes and seating arrangements by women who are present. The absent woman's position is not held for her. It shifts. Society is not sentimental. The tea is finished. You collect the cup. You say nothing. "The evening dress," Mrs. Harrington says. "Is it ready?" "Yes, Mum." "Good." She goes to lie down for the hour before the dressing begins, a practice she maintains on days with evening engagements, the rest that allows the body to manage what the evening will require, and you go to the dressing room and begin the final preparations, and the afternoon light shifts from gold to amber to the beginning of the blue that precedes the dark. This is where we pause for a moment, not to leave the scene, but to give you what you need to understand it. because you are in this room, in this house, in this city, in this year, and you've been doing this work for 14 months, and there are things you know and things you don't, and both of them are important. Here is what you know. You know that Mrs. Harrington is one of the wealthiest women in New York, in a society that defines feminine achievement almost entirely through the management of appearances, and that this management is her full-time occupation. You know that she does it well, better than most, possibly better than anyone in her immediate set, and that this excellence costs her in ways that are real and embodied and daily. The corset and the drops and the powders and the dinners she can't eat, and the mornings that start with headaches she attributes to the air and the fittings that take 3 hours standing still. You know that none of this is discussed, that the discussion would constitute a kind of social heresy, that the beauty and comfort and magnificence of her life is precisely the thing that cannot be admitted to be difficult. Here is what you don't know, or don't know yet. You don't know that the headaches will get worse. You don't know that Mrs. Harrington's doctor will, in March of 1888, recommend that she take a trip to the country for her health. Fresh air, less stimulation, the usual prescription, and that she will go to the Harrington summer house in Newport and feel better within 6 weeks, because the Newport house was decorated last year and does not have the green wallpaper. You don't know that when she returns in June to the Fifth Avenue house, she will be fine for 3 weeks and then begin gradually to feel unwell again, and that this pattern will repeat for 2 more years before someone, not her doctor, a visiting English physician, a man named Whitmore who has read the German research, will look at the wallpaper and say something. You don't know that the Pierce girl will recover. She will. But her heart will be permanently affected. There will be episodes of arrhythmia for the rest of her life, connected to the green douce and the evening's compression and the champagne on an empty stomach and the overheated ballroom, all of which together exceeded what a 24-year-old body, however young and however wealthy, can manage without consequence. You don't know these things. You know what you know, which is that the dress must be perfect and the evening must run correctly, and your position in this house depends on your ability to make both true. At 6:15, Mr. Dawson appears at the dressing-room door with the diamond parure in its velvet box. He sets it on the table with the formal care of a man handling something that is worth more than anything else in a room full of expensive things. The Harrington diamonds are 3 pieces. The collar, which is 4 rows of graduated brilliants with a central pendant stone that is 4 carats and was purchased in Amsterdam in 1879. The earrings, pendant, also brilliant cut, and the bracelet, which closes with a clasp that requires a specific trick of pressure and angle that you've performed so many times it is entirely unconscious. The whole parure is worth approximately $14,000, which is to say more than you will earn in your entire working life. You thank Mr. Dawson. He nods. He goes. The diamonds are cool in their box. They will be warm within minutes of being on her skin. At 6:30, Mrs. Harrington comes in from the bedroom. She is rested. Her face is slightly less composed than it was this morning. The hour horizontal removes some of the dailiness, leaves a kind of quietness, and she sits at the dressing table and looks at herself with the same assessing look, but this time softer, not checking inventory, but perhaps something more personal. Then the look firms again. The evening toilette begins. The evening is different from the morning in the way that a performance is different from a rehearsal. The morning is preparation. The evening is the thing itself. Every choice made in the morning is reconfirmed or revised for the evening's specific requirements. The foundation is heavier, achieving a more constructed surface. The gaslight of the opera needs more contrast, more definition. The eyes are done with more care. The powder at the brow bone, the very fine line along the upper lid made with a tiny brush and a powder so dark it is almost black, and the drops. The belladonna drops are applied 3 at a time with a glass dropper, one eye and then the other, the head tilted back, the drops cool and slightly stinging as they settle. The effect is not immediate. It takes 10 to 15 minutes for the pupils to fully dilate. During that time, Mrs. Harrington sits very still at the dressing table and looks at nothing in particular. She can't focus properly on the close details of the dressing table, so she looks at the middle distance and waits for her eyes to become the ones she needs for tonight. You watch the change happen. You've watched it many times. The pupil expands, the iris contracting to a thin ring of colour, the whole eye becoming larger, darker, more consuming. The face changes around the eyes. It becomes, in a way that you cannot quite articulate, more formidable, more present. The eyes that do not focus and cannot see close detail have an accidental quality of looking into distance, looking at something interior, something the viewer doesn't have access to, and this quality, this accidental interiority, reads as depth, as intelligence, as mystery. It is almost entirely a pharmacological artifact, but it is magnificent. Good, she says, looking at her reflection in the large mirror, which is far enough away that she can focus on it. Good. Now the gown. You lift the greenworth from its form. The gown weighs, you've estimated, approximately 28 pounds. The silk, the lining, the boning in the bodice, the weighted hem, the embellishment at the cuffs. It is designed to be worn over the corset, which means it is designed to fit a body that has already been mechanically altered from its natural shape. You lower it over Mrs. Harrington's head. She lifts her arms and you settle it, and the silk descends around her and begin fastening the back. The fastening at the back is a hook and eye system along the entire spine of the bodice, 32 hooks, each requiring alignment with its corresponding eye, each one small and precise and demanding the same attention as the last. You fasten from the waist upward. The bodice closes. The green silk draws against the corset, the structure beneath giving the structure above its shape. The gown closes. It is at the back a perfect line. The waist is 20 inches. The colour in the gas-lit dressing room is extraordinary, a green that seems to pull light toward it, to gather and intensify it. Against it, Mrs. Harrington's white throat, her dark hair, her dark eyes. The effect is what the newspapers will call striking, and what Mrs. Whittaker will call, on the way to the box, absolutely magnificent. The diamonds. The collar first, because the collar is the most complex. The multiple strands must lie correctly, the pendant centred, the clasp at the back secured. You put it on her. The diamonds settle against her throat, then the earrings, which she puts in herself, the only element she handles without your help, a small retained autonomy, and then the bracelet, your hands on her wrist, the click of the clasp under your specific pressure, the gloves, 22 buttons each. You use the hook, working upward, each button through its loop, left hand and then right hand, 4 minutes per glove, 8 minutes total. You have never in 14 months torn a glove. You have never in 14 months lost a button. The shoes. Satin dyed to match. The heel 3 inches. The last slightly narrow. She sits, and you kneel and settle the shoe on her foot and fasten the buckle. Then the other. You stand. You step back. You look. She stands. She turns slightly, looking in the long mirror, and you look with her at the reflected figure. The green, the white, the diamonds, the dark eyes, the dark hair. And for a moment the room is very quiet except for the sound of the gas jets and the horse traffic below. She is magnificent. She is, in this moment and in this costume and in this light, precisely what she was designed to be, what she has been designing herself to be every morning for 15 years. She is Mrs. Frederick Harrington, and she is dressed for the opera. And she is beautiful in the specific way that money and discipline and pain can produce, a beauty that is real and constructed in equal measure. "Good night, Clara," she says. "Good night, Ma'am. Enjoy the opera," she goes. You hear the sound of the house changing around her departure, Mr. Dawson in the hall, the front door, the carriage below, and then the house settles into its evening quiet, the particular quiet of a house from which the significant person has departed. You move to the window and look down at the street. The Harrington brougham is already moving north on Fifth Avenue, the bays stepping out cleanly in the evening cold, the dark blue carriage with its crest visible for a moment in the lamplight, and then gone. You stand at the window for a little while. You look at Fifth Avenue in the October evening. The avenue is alive at this hour. Other carriages, other people, the lamplighters' work already done, the gas lamps burning at their intervals along the pavement. The houses to the north and south are also lit. The mansions of the Vanderbilts and the Astors and the others. The whole north section of Fifth Avenue a corridor of wealth that is, in this decade, at its most concentrated and its most visible. It is called Millionaire's Row by the newspapers, not admiringly, or not only admiringly. And there is a quality to it in the evening, all these lit windows behind all this stone that is simultaneously magnificent and closed, beautiful and sealed, immense and airless. Mrs. Harrington is going to the Metropolitan Opera. The Metropolitan is 4 years old, having opened in October of 1883 on Broadway and 39th Street. It was built because the Vanderbilts and the new railroad and finance money could not get boxes at the Academy of Music on 14th Street, which was controlled by the old money, the Astors and the Belmonts, the families who'd been in New York since before the Civil War. And so the new money simply built a new opera house, larger and more expensive and with more boxes, and the Metropolitan opened to significant controversy, and has been the premier social venue in New York City ever since. This is how American culture works in 1887. When the right people can't get into the club, they build a better one. The Metropolitan tonight is doing Meyerbeer's Les Huguenots. The company this season is the German opera company under Leopold Damrosch's successors. Damrosch himself died in 1885 conducting, of pneumonia, which is the kind of death that says something about commitment, and the performance will run approximately 4 hours, which means Mrs. Harrington will be in the Greenworth, in the evening corset at 20 inches at the waist, for approximately 6 hours total, including the carriage and the supper that will follow at the Whitakers afterwards. 6 hours, in a corset that reduces her natural waist by 6 inches, in a dress that weighs 28 pounds, in shoes with a 3-inch heel, with eyes that cannot properly focus at close range because of the belladonna. But the performance will be magnificent, and the box will be seen, and the gown will be noted, and the diamonds will be commented on, and by tomorrow the social column in the New York Tribune will report that Mrs. Frederick Harrington was among those present, looking remarkably well in a French green silk, and this sentence will be read by several 100,000 people, and several hundred people will care about it very much. And this is the point of the evening. You leave the window. You have your own work to do. The morning dressing table needs to be reset for tomorrow. The morning gown needs to be shaken and hung. The breakfast tray order needs to be communicated to the kitchen. And you move through it in the quiet house, the efficient background of yourself, the invisible machinery of an invisible life. But tonight, before you sleep, you do something you don't usually do. You take the pamphlet from the Massachusetts Board of Health out from under the spare petticoat where you keep it, and you read it again. Not all of it. The relevant section. The section about arsenical dyes in silk. The section about vapour released during pressing and wearing. The section about the gradual accumulation of arsenic in the tissue. The way it does not announce itself. The way it works slowly through symptoms that resemble other things. Fatigue, headaches, gastric disturbances, a pallor that reads as fashionable until it doesn't. You read it and you fold it and you put it back. You look at your hands in the lamplight, the slight greyness at the fingertips, 14 months of powder and gown and press and arrange. You're not frightened, or you are, but it is a particular kind of fear, a slow and quiet one, the fear of someone who has read the map and knows the territory but cannot change the road. You are the lady's maid. You press the gown, you open the powder, you arrange the belladonna bottle. You're not the doctor. You're not the conscience. You're the person who makes everything look correct. Your lower back aches. Your hands are slightly grey. You're 22 years old. The house creaks around you. The heating pipes talk. Somewhere 2 floors below, the kitchen is finishing its cleaning after the staff dinner. Somewhere 4 floors above, in the servants' hall, Bridget is probably already asleep. Somewhere north on 5th Avenue, Mrs. Harrington is in her green dress in her box at the Metropolitan, and her eyes are dark and enormous, and the gaslight is making the diamonds at her throat look like fire, and someone is about to start the overture. The October night settles over the city. The gas lamps burn on 5th Avenue. The horses have mostly stopped. The carriages of the wealthy move north and south in the dark. You blow out the lamp and lie down on the narrow bed, and in the dark the wallpaper in Mrs. Harrington's room, 3 floors above you but connected by pipes and plaster, and the shared air of the house, continues its slow and invisible work. Tomorrow you will get up before 6. Tomorrow the floor will be cold. Tomorrow the powder box will be open, the iron will heat, the buttons will be counted. Tonight, for now, you sleep. Это примерно 7500 слов. Часть 1. Пиши, продолжай. Я дам следующий блок. You said, continue, 1355. Claude responded, you wake before the alarm. Plotted narrative continuation with immersive storytelling techniques. Plotted narrative continuation with immersive storytelling techniques. You wake before the alarm. Not because you heard something. Because your body has learned, over 14 months of 6 o'clock mornings, to surface from sleep at 5:45 the way a stone surfaces in a field after rain, gradually, inevitably, without being asked. The darkness is the same darkness. The smell of the room is the same smell. The ache in your lower back is a half note sharper than yesterday, which you register and file and do nothing with. Bridget is breathing on the other side of the room. Nora is quiet. Outside the single window, the sky is the pre-dawn non-colour that has no name in English. A dark that is considering the possibility of less dark. You get up, you dress, you go. The house at 5:45 has its own quality, different from the house at any other hour. It is a working house masquerading as a monument, and at 5:45 the working shows. The kitchen is already lit, cook's lamp visible under the door when you pass, the smells of the range starting. And the back stairs creak in their specific language. 3rd step, 7th step, 2nd from the landing, and the hall runner on the 2nd floor is slightly crooked because someone moved the hall table yesterday and didn't correct the runner, which you notice and straighten with your foot as you pass because it will matter later. The dressing room first. You check the green worth, which came back last night draped over the arm of the dressing room chair rather than on its form. Because Mrs. Harrington arrived home at 1 in the morning. You heard the carriage, you heard the door, you heard the footsteps. And unhooking a 32-hook bodice at 1 in the morning is a task best performed quickly and without ceremony, and the gown on the chair rather than on the form is the evidence of that economy. You lift it, you examine it in the morning light. The bodice is slightly compressed along the left side seam from the evening's hours of wear. The hem has a small darkening, the opera house floor, a scuff of something, that will require attention. The whole gown smells very faintly of the evening, candle wax and cigar smoke that drifted from the corridors between acts, champagne, powder, the particular warm smell of a room with 2,000 people in it for 4 hours. You hang the gown on its form. You note the hem problem in the small notebook you keep, which records everything that requires attention and nothing that doesn't. You close the dressing room and go for the tray. Mrs. Harrington sleeps until 8:15. This is 45 minutes late, which means last night went later than usual, which the supper at the Whitakers would account for. You arrange the tray with the adjustment, coffee at the same strength, but a second piece of toast, because a late night and a light supper mean hunger this morning. You bring it up. You check the fire. You wait. At 8:17 her eyes open, the half-second of nowhere, then the ceiling, then you. The hem, she says immediately, before she has sat up, before the coffee, because the green worth was her last conscious thought before sleep, and it is her first conscious thought now. This is how her mind works. You've learned it. I've noted it, Mum. I'll take it to Madam Ellison this morning. Today. Today, she sits up. She looks worse than yesterday slightly. The pallor has a particular quality this morning, a yellowish undertone that you've learned to read as the combination of late evening champagne and the unspecified accumulation of things that accumulate. The belladonna eyes have largely resolved. The pupils are nearly normal, though not quite. They never quite return to full normal the next morning. But there is a brittleness around the eyes that is tiredness at its most honest, the kind that powder addresses on the surface and doesn't touch underneath. The Pierce girl, she says again, for the 3rd time in 2 days. You pour the coffee, you wait. Mrs. Whittaker had news. She wraps both hands around the cup, which is something she does when she's cold, or when she's about to say something she's still deciding how to say. Charlotte Reese is also unwell, since Thursday, the same evening. A pause. Mrs. Whittaker thinks it's the same illness travelling through the party. Some fever. You set the pot down. I'm sorry to hear it, ma'am. 2 women, from the same evening. She drinks. She's looking at the window rather than at you. In the same week. You don't say what you know. You don't say the word arsenic, which is a word you read in a pamphlet from Massachusetts that cost you 3 cents in a second-hand shop on Greenwich Street, and which has been living under the spare petticoat for 6 months. You don't say it, because you are the lady's maid, and the knowledge in the pamphlet requires a medical standing you do not have, and because Mrs. Harrington's doctor is a fashionable physician on Madison Avenue, who drives a very good carriage, and because the Greenworth cost $300 and came from the most important fashion house in the world, and because some things cannot be said from where you are standing. But you look at her face, the yellow pallor, the eyes that are slightly not quite right, the thinness in the cheek that she named herself yesterday, holding her coffee cup with both hands looking at the window. "Should I bring your medicine, ma'am?" you ask. This is the headache medicine, which is a patent preparation called Dr. Hooker's restorative compound, and which contains, among other things, alcohol, quinine, and a small quantity of opium. It is sold at every pharmacy in the city. It is prescribed for headaches, nervous exhaustion, feminine debility, and general unpleasantness. Mrs. Harrington takes it approximately 4 times a week. "No," she says. Then, "Yes, actually, the small dose." You bring it from the medicine chest in the bathroom, a teaspoon in a small glass. She takes it with the same matter-of-fact efficiency with which she does everything, a competent management of discomfort, the way you manage the buttons, counted, completed, filed. The morning routine begins. You work through it, the same sequence as yesterday and the day before and the day before that. The washing, the cream, the powder, the hair. But the morning has a different quality today, a slightly lower register, the way a room sounds different when the window is slightly open. Mrs. Harrington is quieter. The medicine is working, the compound doing whatever it does, and she sits at the dressing table with the composure of someone who has turned down the volume on what her body is telling her, which is a skill she's had since approximately her first season, when she was 18 and corseting for the first time, and learned that the body's objections are negotiable. "The Whitakers had a doctor there," she says, "while you're working the second section of hair. At supper, Dr. Parsons." A pause. "He was talking about the air, in the opera house. Says the ventilation is inadequate." "Is it, ma'am?" "Apparently." She considers the mirror. "We thinks the gas jets consume too much oxygen. Makes women light-headed. He said 2 or 3 women a season faint from it." You pin the section. The gas jets in the Metropolitan Opera House consume approximately 1,000 cubic feet of oxygen per hour when fully lit. The temperature in a packed house on a cold night rises to something between 80 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit. The women in the house are wearing on average 25 to 35 pounds of dress, supported on corsets that compress the breathing apparatus by a measurable degree. 2 or 3 women fainting per season is, under these conditions, not a mystery. It's arithmetic. But Dr. Parsons has named the gas jets, which is probably close to accurate, and which is certainly easier to name than the green gown. And Mrs. Harrington nods and accepts the gas jets as the explanation, because it is a reasonable explanation from a doctor at supper, and the alternative requires thinking about her dress in a way she's not prepared to think about her dress. "He recommended cold water," she says, "between acts, for the freshness of the air." Very sensible, you say. You finish the hair, you step back, it is correct. She nods the single small nod of approval and rises to begin the dressing, and you retrieve the day dress. Today it is grey wool, a walking costume because the morning requires Madame Ellison's shop, and Madame Ellison is 6 blocks away, and Mrs. Harrington walks when the weather permits, and today it permits, cold but clear, and the morning moves through its familiar sequence of buttons and adjustments and small corrections, and by 9:30 she is ready, and by 9:45 she is gone. You take the Greenworth off its form and wrap it carefully in the cotton sheet and carry it, held away from your body as if it were something that might wake, down the back stairs and out into the October morning. Madame Ellison's shop is on 51st Street between 5th and Madison. in a narrow brownstone that has been a dressmaking establishment for 11 years. The front of the shop is modest. 2 small windows with a single glove and a length of velvet ribbon arranged in them, and the interior is deep and warm and smells of sizing and silk, and the particular dry smell of pressing irons not currently in use. Madame Ellison herself is 61 years old, French-born, New York-trained, and capable of invisible repair work that constitutes, in the trade, a form of magic. You've been here before. You unwrap the gown and show her the hem. She looks at it for approximately 4 seconds. Scuff, she says. Something black, shoe polish possibly, or floor wax. The opera. Of course the opera. She examines the thread along the hem. The thread is intact. I'll clean it and press the hem back. An hour. You look at the gown on the work table. The green. The specific chemical green. Up close, under the bright shop lighting, the fabric has a quality you've been noticing more lately. A slight dustiness along the outer surface. A fine powdering of the dye crystals on the outer weave. Not visible in normal light. Not visible in gaslit rooms, but here, under direct clear daylight, perceptible. Madame Ellison, you say. She looks up from the hem. The green dye in this fabric. You stop. You start again. Have you read anything? Is there discussion in the trade about the green dyes in the French silks? She's quiet for a moment. She has the quality of someone who is deciding something. Her hands on the hem don't move. Where did you read about it? She asks. Not unkind. Specific. A pamphlet from Massachusetts. She looks at you for a moment. A direct appraising look. The look of a woman who has been working with fabrics for 40 years and who has, in those 40 years, seen things accumulate to conclusions. It's known, she says. She says it quietly, in the way that things known in a trade and not discussed publicly are said, with a kind of careful precision, the voice of someone placing a stone exactly where it needs to go. In the trade, the French houses know. They've been working on alternatives. The Lyons mills have been changing their formulations. But this gown is from 1885, before the change. She looks at the fabric. The green from that period. Yes, the dye is copper arsenite. Sheela's compound. She folds the hem back to show you the inner surface. More concentration here. In the fold. Heat releases it. Moisture releases it. You look at the inner surface. The green is deeper there, where light hasn't faded it. The women who wear it, you say. Mostly fine, she says. Mostly. The body can manage a certain level of exposure without consequence. The problem is accumulation, over time, over many evenings. She pauses. And the dressmakers and maids who handle the fabric daily. Your hands on the gown, 14 months of handling. Is there anything? Gloves, she says, when you handle it. For the pressing, open the window. Don't breathe the steam directly. She pauses again. And if you can persuade your employer to consider an alternative for the green, there are good alternatives now. Aniline dyes, much safer. That would be the best course. Persuade your employer. You hold this phrase for a moment, weighing it against the reality of your position in the hierarchy of the house on Fifth Avenue, the reality of the 32-hook bodice and the Madison Avenue doctor, and the single small nod of approval. I'll try, you say. Good girl, says Madame Ellison, in the tone of someone who does not expect the attempt to succeed. You sit in the small waiting area while she works. The shop has a half window overlooking the street, and you watch 51st Street in the October morning. The delivery wagons, a nursemaid with 2 small children, A woman in a brown coat walking quickly with her head down against the wind. The city at mid-morning. The working city, the moving city. The city that has 20 different lives running simultaneously in 20 different registers, and none of them entirely aware of the others. In 1887, New York is building itself in multiple directions at once. The elevated railways, the L trains, run up 2nd and 3rd and 6th and 9th Avenues, carrying working people for 5 cents a ride. A practical solution to a city that is expanding faster than its street grid can manage. The Brooklyn Bridge opened 4 years ago in 1883. The longest suspension bridge in the world at the time, its towers visible from most of lower Manhattan, its cables a daily reminder that this era can build things that have never existed before. The tenement districts on the Lower East Side are receiving waves of immigration, Italian, Eastern European, Jewish, that are transforming the city's population at a rate that alarms some and astonishes others. The gap between 5th Avenue and Mulberry Street is approximately 1 mile and approximately 1 century. You know all this. You grew up in Poughkeepsie, which is not New York, but it's close enough to New York to know what New York means, and you've been here long enough now to know the city's specific geography, not as a tourist, but as a person who uses it. You know which markets on which streets have the best prices. You know which pharmacies carry the genuine formulations and which water them down. You know the L train schedule and where to transfer. You know where the second-hand bookshops are. What you don't know, what no one has told you, is what to do with what you know. The gown comes back at 10:30, the hem corrected, the scuff gone. The Madame Ellison has pressed it with a cold iron through 2 layers of muslin, and the hem lies exactly as it should. You rewrap it, you thank her, you go. Walking back up 5th Avenue with the bundled gown under your arm, you pass the mansions. The Vanderbilt double house at 57th Street. William Henry Vanderbilt's twin brownstones built in 1881. An entire city block of private residence, 60 rooms, the largest private house in the city, is being cleaned this morning. 2 men on ladders washing the upper windows, the iron railings being polished below. The Vanderbilt house. The house that a newspaper called a monument to the new aristocracy, and that another newspaper called a monument to bad taste, and that most people just called an indicator of how much money could be spent on a building if you had enough of it, which the Vanderbilts demonstrably did. William Henry Vanderbilt made about $94 million in his lifetime, which in 1887 money is a number that does not have an easy equivalent. Put it this way. In 1887, a factory worker in New York earns about $500 a year, working 6 days a week, 10 to 12 hours a day. $94 million is what that factory worker would earn, at that rate, in approximately 188,000 years. This is not a political statement. It is arithmetic. The Gilded Age was an era of arithmetic that no one had yet developed the language to fully describe. You walk. The gown is not heavy. The morning is cold. Your breath is visible. You think about Madame Ellison's word, accumulation. It is the right word. The body can manage a certain level of exposure without consequence. The problem is accumulation. This is true of more than the arsenic you think. This is true of the corset that is worn every day, of the belladonna that is used 3 times a week, of the medicines with the opium, of the evening meals too small for the evening's length, of the 6-week social invisibility that is worse than illness, of the morning routine that takes 2 hours to produce a face that reads as natural, of the life that is organized entirely around a performance whose audience never acknowledges the effort. Everything in Mrs. Harrington's world is accumulating slowly, in the direction of a conclusion that nobody is planning for and nobody's willing to name. You turn onto the side street that takes you back to the Harrington house. That afternoon, Mrs. Harrington has visitors. This is the part of the Gilded Age day that takes place in the drawing room, the room that functions as the social organ of the house, the room where the city's social life is transacted in sitting rooms under the supervision of good furniture and better china. The calling hours run from 3 to 5 in the afternoon. This is the established convention, the hours when women of Mrs. Harrington's set receive. And today there are 3 callers, announced by Mr. Dawson in the drawing room with the correct form. Mrs. Whittaker arrives first. Eleanor Whittaker is 41 years old, the wife of Thomas Whittaker, who is in insurance and railroad and various other consolidated things, and she has known Mrs. Harrington since before either of them was married. She is large-boned, confident, loud in the specific way that fifth-generation New York money is loud, not in volume but in assumption. The assumption that the room is hers, that the conversation will go where she directs it, that this is simply how things are. She is not unkind. She is simply occupied by the privileges of her position in a way that takes up most of the available space. Mrs. Whittaker sits, accepts tea, and within 4 minutes has produced the relevant social information that constitutes the real purpose of the call. Charlotte Reese is worse. The doctor now says 2 weeks of rest, not 1. The Wendell ball is being investigated, by which Mrs. Whittaker means that several women connected to it are comparing notes, though investigated is a strong word for the conversation she's describing, which consists largely of attributions to the weather, the champagne, the heat of the ballroom, and the particular fragility of modern constitutions. Nobody, in Mrs. Whittaker's account, is looking at the green dresses. I myself felt quite odd that evening, Mrs. Whittaker says. She's wearing, you note from your position near the door where you stand in case of need, a blue velvet calling costume trimmed with dark braid. Blue, not green. I mentioned it to Parsons at supper. He says the gas in those rooms. He mentioned it to me as well, says Mrs. Harrington. He's right, I think. Mrs. Whittaker takes another piece of the small almond cake cook made for the calling hours. The Metropolitan is getting worse every season. We should write to Abbey about the ventilation. Henry Abbey is the manager of the Metropolitan Opera. The suggestion of writing to him is the sort of suggestion that sounds like action, and is actually the drawing room's way of not taking action, the committee motion that sounds resolute and results in a letter that gets read and filed and responded to with a polite acknowledgement. I'll speak to Frederick, Mrs. Harrington says. Mr. Harrington is on the Metropolitan Board. Boards are where things happen, if they happen. You stand, you observe. You're part of the furniture in this moment, which is your function and your cover, because from behind the furniture of your position, you can see the room very clearly. Mrs. Harrington in her chair by the window, slightly pale, the headache medicine working smoothly through the afternoon. Mrs. Whittaker on the sofa, eating cake, projecting vitality with the enthusiasm of someone who has always had excellent health and has never particularly examined why. The drawing room around them, the oil portraits of Mr. Harrington's New England ancestors, the Tiffany glass vase on the mantel, the silk curtains in a deep gold that was the fashionable colour 3 years ago, and has remained because changing curtains requires a commitment to change that Mrs. Harrington hasn't made yet. The room is warm, the fire is correct. The second caller is Miss Gertrude Haverford, who is 20 years old, and the daughter of Mr. James Haverford of the Haverford dry goods fortune. and who's in her second season, and who calls on Mrs. Harrington approximately once a week with the dedicated attention of a young woman who's identified correctly that Mrs. Harrington's social position is one of the ones worth cultivating. Miss Haverford is eager and pretty, and not quite smart enough to conceal the eagerness, which Mrs. Harrington finds either touching or exhausting depending on the day. Today, Mrs. Harrington finds her touching. This is because Miss Haverford, in her calling costume, also blue, also not green, also not an accident, because the word has been going round about the Wendell evening, even if the word hasn't taken its final form, brings something with her that is recognisable to you as relief. The girl is uncomplicated. She talks about a concert at the Steinway Hall, a new novel she's reading, the upcoming Bradley Martin ball that everyone is already discussing, though it's months away. She does not mention the Pierce girl or Charlotte Reese. She does not mention the opera or the ventilation. She is 20 years old and in her second season, and the worst thing that has happened to her this week is that the trim on her new hat was the wrong shade of ivory and had to be redone. Mrs. Harrington listens to her with an expression that is very nearly warm. You have rarely seen Mrs. Harrington's face settle into that particular configuration, and when it does, it has the quality of something that has relaxed from a position it maintains constantly and doesn't know it maintains. Watching a woman of 31 listen to a girl of 20 talk about an ivory trim with something approaching actual pleasure is a specific observation, and you carry it with you. The third caller does not stay long. This is Mrs. Edmund Price, Cecilia Price, 52, wife of a judge, old New York money, the kind of woman whose social authority is so established it doesn't need to perform itself. She comes in, sits, drinks 1 cup of tea, delivers in 15 minutes a summary of the relevant social information of the week with the efficiency of a very good filing system, and goes. She mentions, in passing, that she saw the new Sargent portrait of Mrs. Belmont at the Century Club, and that it is remarkable, and that Sargent is taking portrait commissions through the spring, and that if Mrs. Harrington has been thinking about it, she leaves the sentence at thinking about it, because Mrs. Cecilia Price does not complete sentences when leaving them incomplete has the same effect. After Mrs. Price leaves, Mrs. Harrington sits for a moment in the drawing room with the remains of the tea things around her. You come in to begin clearing. This is not your job, but the footman is otherwise occupied and the tea things need moving. And Mrs. Harrington says, without preamble, "Sergeant." You look up from the tray. Do you think he'd be interested? She's looking at the mantel, at the Tiffany vase, not at you. In this house, for a portrait. I think any subject that interested him would be an honour for the subject, ma'am. This is a polished response, accurate and non-committal, and she receives it with a slight curve of the mouth that is as close to a smile as the afternoon has produced. John Singer Sargent in 1887 is 31 years old, the same age as Mrs. Harrington, and already the most discussed portrait painter in the Anglo-American world, following the scandal of his Madame X portrait at the Paris Salon in 1884 and his subsequent relocation to London. He paints women with a quality that is simultaneously flattering and revealing, catching something in the posture and the light and the arrangement of silk that tells you more than the subject intended. His portraits of wealthy women are magnificent and slightly terrifying, because they document the construction of feminine power in the Gilded Age with the precision of a naturalist. And if you look at them long enough, you see both the woman and the performance, both the silk and what the silk is doing. Mrs. Harrington considering a Sargent portrait is Mrs. Harrington considering permanence. A portrait is a claim. This is what I was, at my best, recorded and fixed and made to outlast me. It is also a statement about position, about belonging to the permanent record of the era, which is why Mrs. Price mentioned it, and why Mrs. Harrington is now looking at the mantel and thinking about it. You clear the tea things. You take the tray to the kitchen. You come back. The drawing room is empty. Mrs. Harrington has gone upstairs to rest before dinner, and you begin the small remediation of the room after visitors. The cushions straightened, the chairs returned to their positions, the small dent in the pile of the carpet where Mrs. Whittaker's substantial feet rested for 45 minutes brushed back to level. The house moves toward evening. This is its daily rhythm, and you know it the way you know a piece of music you've played many times, not by thinking about it, but by being in it. The tempo and the dynamics familiar, the difficult passages navigated by long practice. The kitchen is preparing dinner for Mr. and Mrs. Harrington. Tonight it's a quiet evening, just the two of them, no guests, which means a dinner of 5 courses served at 8, light by their standards, and the kitchen's activity at this hour has the specific quality of a process mid-execution. Everything in motion, nothing improvised. You go to the dressing room. Tonight is a home evening, which means an at-home gown, less formal than last night, still correct, still fitted, still corseted, but the lighter evening corset, not the real one, and the hair simply dressed. You prepare the room, you lay out the gown, a deep burgundy velvet, French made, but not Worth, a dinner gown rather than an occasion gown, and the correct underpinnings and the small amethyst set that goes with the burgundy. The amethysts are less valuable than the diamonds, and they live in a smaller case in the same safe, and they are Mr. Dawson's responsibility to retrieve this evening. You note this in the small notebook. At 7, Mrs. Harrington comes in for the evening dressing. Tonight there are no belladonna drops, because the drops are for occasions when being seen matters in a particular way, and dinner alone with her husband is not that occasion. This is, you have noticed, one of the consistent economies of her private life. When the audience is reduced, certain performances are suspended. The drops, the heaviest powder, the most elaborate hair arrangements, these are public instruments. At home, alone or nearly alone, she allows a version of herself that is slightly less constructed, slightly less performed, and this version is not exactly unguarded, but it is closer to something that might be the person underneath the machine, if there is a person underneath the machine, if the machine has not by this point become the person. You wonder about this sometimes. You wonder if, after 15 years of the morning routine, there is a self that exists prior to and apart from the construction. Whether she knows what her face looks like without powder, whether she has been in a room since her marriage without a corset, whether the 12 seconds of adjusting her face in the morning, the transition from sleeping person to public person, contains a moment of actual choice, or whether the adjustment has become so automatic that it is just another thing the body does, like breathing. These are not questions you ask, they're questions you carry. The dinner dressing is quicker than the opera dressing, 30 minutes, not 2 hours. The burgundy gown closes with 18 hooks, not 32. The hair takes 20 minutes in a simple evening chignon. The amethysts go on quickly, the clasp of the bracelet operating as usual under the specific trick of pressure. You step back. You look. She's correct for a home dinner. Beautiful specifically, in the way that burgundy velvet and low light and a woman who's very good at being dressed can produce even on a quiet evening. She looks at herself in the mirror for a moment, the assessing look. Then, unusually, she keeps looking, not assessing, something else. She's looking at her face, at the cheekbones, at the place where the thinness has arrived. "Do you think?" she says, and stops. You wait. The pallor. She doesn't finish this either. She touches her face very lightly with 2 fingers, just below the left cheekbone. "Do you think it's improving?" You look at her face in the mirror. The yellow undertone from this morning has settled into something more neutral. The powder is correct. The light from the gas jets in the dressing room is warm and forgiving. She looks, in this light, well. She looks, in this light, beautiful. "Your colour is very good tonight, ma'am," you say. She looks at you in the mirror for a longer moment than usual. She has the expression of someone who is deciding whether to ask a question directly or let it remain a glance. She lets it remain a glance. "Thank you, Clara," she says, and goes down to dinner. You eat in the servants' hall. Mutton stew tonight. Good mutton. Thick. The kitchen's version of a cold weather evening, with bread and the heel of a butter block that has been on the table since yesterday and is slightly rancid but acceptable if you don't eat the darker part. Tea. Bridget is talking about the runner she had to beat this afternoon. A full description of the difficulty and the dust. A minor epic of domestic labour delivered with the dry specificity of someone who has learned that details are the only currency of the servants' hall, where rank governs everything except the quality of the story. The runner weighed about 12 stone, she says, or that's what it felt like. Runners don't weigh 12 stone, says James, one of the footmen, who is 17 and has opinions. This one did. Bridget reaches for more bread. Ask Clara, she's seen it. It's a heavy runner, you agree. James makes a sceptical noise. The conversation moves to other things. The delivery boy who was rude to cook this morning. The state of the 3rd-floor water closet. The fact that Nora's sister is apparently getting married in December, and Nora wants a day off to attend, and Mrs. Fenwick has not yet given an answer. You eat. You listen. The conversation of the servants' hall is one of the things you didn't expect when you came here. The density of it, the specificity, the way it constitutes its own parallel universe of event and opinion and personality, running exactly alongside the universe of the drawing room and the dining room but never quite touching it. The 2 worlds separated by a door and a staircase and an enormous amount of unspoken agreement. After dinner, you return to the dressing room to await Mrs. Harrington's call for the night routine. This is the last performance of the day, the unmaking of the evening. The gown off, the corset unlaced, the hair unpinned, the face cleaned of the evening's powder. It is in some ways the most intimate part of the day, and you perform it with the same precision as the morning routine, which means with the same invisibility, the same careful non-presence. The unmaking requires proximity. You must stand close to unlace the corset, close to remove the pins from the hair, and proximity requires discipline, the discipline of being physically close to another person and remaining thoroughly elsewhere in every way that matters. She comes in at 10:15. The dinner was quiet, she says, not aloud, but in the quality of her movement, the way she sits at the dressing table, the small exhalation when you begin to unlace the corset. Quiet evenings with Mr. Harrington are a subject you've assembled from fragments over 14 months without ever receiving a direct report. You know that he is a large man physically, not fat but substantial, with a manner that is comfortable in boardrooms and slightly too large for drawing rooms. You know that he reads after dinner. You know that he gives her jewellery for significant occasions and money for everything else, and that these are his primary languages of attention. You know that he was not at the opera last night and will not be at the Whittaker dinner next week, because his presence at social events is selective rather than consistent, a prerogative of the person who funds the social events rather than the person who performs them. You know that on the evenings when she comes upstairs to the dressing room, there is occasionally a quality in her that is slightly heavier than before dinner, a weight that is not fatigue exactly, but is something in the vicinity of fatigue, and that on these evenings the unlacing of the corset produces an exhalation that is longer than usual, and that after the corset is off she sits for a moment before the next thing with the posture of someone who has set down something she's been carrying. Tonight is such an evening. The corset unlaces, the exhalation, the sitting. You wait. You prepare the night cream, which is a simple formulation, almond oil and rose water, kept in a flat tin, and bring it to the dressing table. You begin unpinning the hair. 27 pins, counted out onto the pin tray as you go. The hair loosens, falls slightly, the weight of it redistributing. You work from the top, the decorative pins first, then the structural ones, the chignon releasing gradually as each supporting pin is removed. "Sergeant," she says. She's looking at her face in the mirror, the face without full evening powder, the face at the end of the day. "Do you think he would paint the house?" "The house, Mum?" "As a setting, not just a woman against a background, but the house itself, the rooms." She considers. "There's a quality his paintings have, of showing things as they are." You're unpinning the last of the chignon. The hair falls to her shoulders, dark brown, loosened from its hours of constraint. "I believe that's considered his great gift, Ma'am," you say carefully, "his truthfulness." She looks at herself in the mirror for a moment. Then she says quietly, in the voice she uses for things she is not quite saying, "Do you think the truth of a thing is always what it appears to be?" You hold the last pin. The room is warm and very quiet. Outside, Fifth Avenue is almost still. "No, Ma'am," you say. She holds your eyes in the mirror for one moment. Then she looks away. "No," she agrees. And then, "The cream, please." You apply the night cream. You clean the remaining powder with a soft flannel. You help her into the night robe. You fold the velvet gown and hang the components. You collect the pin tray and carry it to its drawer. You straighten the dressing table, the morning's arrangement restored, the bottles in their places, the powder box closed, the small blue belladonna bottle standing upright in its position on the right. You look at the blue bottle for a moment. Then you put out the dressing room lamp and say good night and close the door behind you. And the house is quiet, and you go up the back stairs to the 4th floor, and the floor is cold under your feet, and you lie down on the narrow bed in the dark. The green gown is 3 floors below you in the closed dressing room. It is hanging correctly on its form, the hem repaired, the silk smooth, folded as it should be, the dust cover in place. Tomorrow someone may wear it or may not. It will wait either way. It is very patient, the green gown. The wallpaper in Mrs. Harrington's room is also patient. 3 years of being patient in that room, doing its slow and invisible work in the dark hours, releasing its compounds into the air that a woman breathes through the night, in the room that she returns to every morning, the room with the green ceiling, the room she chose the paper for herself, from a sample book in 1883 because the green was exactly the right green, the green of the jewel, the green that makes the room the most beautiful room in a very beautiful house. You close your eyes. Tomorrow at 5:45 the darkness will be the same darkness. The ache in your back will be a half note sharper. The floor will be cold. But first, this. The specific rest of an exhausted body in a warm enough room. The sound of Bridget breathing. The faint sound of the avenue below, already diminished, a carriage here and there, the last movement of the city's working day. The smell of the room, the wool and the human smell and the faint chemical undertone that lives in the back of your throat and that you have stopped noticing. Sleep comes. It always does, eventually. The body doesn't have the luxury of not sleeping. 3 floors below, in the green room, Mrs. Adeline Cornelius Harrington lies under the green ceiling and breathes the air of her beautiful room, and the house is still, and the avenue is still, and October holds the city in its particular cold clarity. And somewhere out there in the dark, the Metropolitan Opera is dark and locked, and the Vanderbilt house is lit on the upper floors, and the tenements on the Lower East Side are full of sleeping people who earn $500 a year, and the gap between them and this house is 1 mile and 1 century, and everything is, by the standards of 1887, correct. Это часть 2. Еще примерно 7,500 слов. Суммарно около 15,000. Пиши продолжай. Дам следующий блок. You said continue. Write the next large section. Minimum 15,000 words. Continue. Write the next large section. Minimum 15,000 words 1404. Claude responded, 3 weeks pass. Architected narrative expansion through character development and escalating social tension. Architected narrative expansion through character development and escalating social tension. 3 weeks pass. This is how it works in the Gilded Age. Not in dramatic events, but in the accumulation of days, each one a near-perfect reproduction of the last. The routine so consistent it becomes a kind of weather, something you move through rather than observe. The mornings follow their sequence. The dressing table follows its logic. The powder goes on and the hair goes up and the hooks are counted and the carriage goes out and comes back and the visiting hours happen and the tea things are cleared and the dinner gown replaces the day dress and the pins come out and the night cream goes on and the lamp goes out and it begins again. 3 weeks. And in 3 weeks the following things happen. Charlotte Reese does not improve. The 2 weeks of rest become 3, and the doctor who has been attending her is now speaking about the heart in the specific careful language that means something more serious than a social inconvenience. And Mrs. Whittaker, who calls on Mrs. Harrington on the Thursday of the 2nd week, mentions it with a quality in her voice that is, for Mrs. Whittaker, something close to uncertainty, not fear. Mrs. Whittaker does not do fear in a recognizable form, but something adjacent to it, the social equivalent of a crack appearing in a wall that was supposed to be structural. Parsons has called in Dr. Loomis, she says, setting down her cup, for a second opinion. Dr. Loomis is an internist of some reputation. You know this because when Mrs. Whittaker says his name, a small charge goes around the drawing room, a brief, barely visible alteration in the quality of the air, because the women in this room know who Dr. Loomis is and know that you do not call Dr. Loomis for a young woman's inconvenient episode of faintness at a ball. You call Dr. Loomis for things that have names. Mrs. Harrington sets her cup down with a very small sound. I'll call on her Friday. She's not receiving. Mrs. Whittaker's voice is careful. The family has asked for quiet. When a family of Charlotte Reese's standing ask for quiet, what they mean is that the situation has progressed beyond the management of social performance, which is a significant thing to acknowledge in a world where social performance is the primary management tool for almost all situations. They mean the machinery is being suspended because the person inside the machinery is in real trouble. You stand near the door, you look at your hands, the slight greyness at the fingertips, which has not changed in 3 weeks, which you have been examining in the morning light with the focused attention of someone reading a text in a language they are still learning. After Mrs. Whittaker leaves, the drawing room is quiet in a way it isn't usually quiet. Mrs. Harrington sits in her chair by the window and looks out at Fifth Avenue, and the light is the late October light, thinning and cold, and the bare trees along the avenue have lost enough of their leaves to show the architecture of the branches, this specific structure of things stripped to their essentials. She doesn't call for anything. You are present near the door. After perhaps 5 minutes, she says, still looking at the window, "The Pierce girl is better." "I'm glad to hear it, ma'am." Charlotte is not. A pause. "Not yet." "No, ma'am." Another pause. The avenue below is busy at this hour. The afternoon traffic of delivery wagons and private carriages and the occasional figure on foot moving against the wind. "Clara." "Ma'am." She turns from the window and looks at you directly, which she rarely does. The look is specific, different from the assessing look, something more searching, as if she's trying to read something written in small text. "The green worth," she says, "I want it stored, not in the dressing room, in the cedar chest, with the summer things." You look at her, she looks at you. "Of course, ma'am," you say. She looks back at the window. The conversation is over. You go to the dressing room and you take the green worth off its form and fold it carefully in its tissue and lay it in the cedar chest at the foot of the bed in the spare room, and you close the lid and you come back, and neither of you says anything more about it. This is not the conversation you wanted. It is also the conversation you were going to have with her about the green worth, in the version of the conversation you rehearsed on your narrow bed in the dark. The facts from the pamphlet, the information from Madame Ellison, the word accumulation. You had rehearsed it. You had chosen the moment, after the dressing was done, when she was calm, in the morning before the day had filled with its obligations. You had considered the words, but she got there first, not through your information, through something else, some private calculation run in the quiet of a woman who's been noticing her own face in the mirror every morning for 31 years, and who has, in recent months, been noticing things she does not like. The thinness, the pallor, Charlotte Reese, the Pierce girl, 2 women from the same evening, a dress that is stored with the summer things. She got there first, and the dress is in the cedar chest. And that will have to be enough. November arrives. This is the proper season for New York society, the season of maximum activity, the months between October and March when the social machinery operates at its highest register. The opera, the dinners, the charity balls, the card parties, the morning calls, the afternoon calls, the late suppers, the concert series at Carnegie Hall, which opened this year with enormous attention, and which is still the subject of considerable opinion about its architecture, its acoustic properties, and whether Andrew Carnegie, who funded it, deserves the admiration or the suspicion with which he is regarded, depending on whether you are speaking to a musician or a steelworker. You are, in this house, speaking to neither. The schedule in November expands. There are 3 major dinners in the first 2 weeks, each requiring the full production apparatus, gown selection and preparation, hair appointments with Duval, jewellery arranged with Mr. Dawson, carriage times coordinated with the coachman, the specific logistics of a woman who needs to appear at several different addresses on several different evenings, in several different configurations of dress and accessories, and must appear at each one as if the effort is effortless. It is not effortless. You know this more precisely than anyone because you are the effort. You are the one who presses and counts and pins and unpins and represses and recounts. You are the one who knows that the ivory evening coat from Redfern's, which arrived on Thursday the 3rd and which is objectively the most beautiful garment you have personally handled since you arrived at this house, has a slight pull along the right shoulder seam that will require reinforcement before it is worn, and that you will spend an hour on a Tuesday afternoon reinforcing it with invisible stitching that will itself be invisible, the labour of making invisible labour last. The first of the November dinners is at the Harrington house itself. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington are hosting 12. The Whitakers, the Aldridges, the Vanderbergs, Mrs. Harrington's parents, visiting from their house in Murray Hill, the Pennington couple whose social position is newer and somewhat carefully managed, a judge and his wife, and a Mr. Cabot who is in shipping, and whose wife is visiting a sister in Boston, and who comes alone, which creates a table geometry problem that Mrs. Harrington solves over breakfast on the morning of the dinner with the focused calculation of an engineer identifying a load-bearing point. Move Mrs. Aldridge to Frederick's left, she says, looking at the seating chart she's drawn on a card, and put the judge at the foot. She looks at the arrangement. Mr. Cabot between Mrs. Vanderberg and Mrs. Whitaker. They'll take care of him. Being taken care of by Mrs. Vanderberg and Mrs. Whitaker is, you imagine, a comprehensive experience. Mrs. Vanderberg is 64 and formidable in the way of Dutch New York families, who have been formidable in this city since approximately 1650 and show no sign of moderating. Mrs. Whitaker is, as established, a room-occupying force. Mr. Cabot, alone without his wife, will be adequately managed. A dinner at the Harrington house for 12 requires the house to function at its maximum efficiency, which means everyone in it working at a level of coordination that the military would recognise. The kitchen has been preparing since yesterday. The soup, the fish course, the 2 removes, the roast, the game, the pudding, the ices, the cheese, a menu of 8 courses that will take 3 hours to serve and consume, and that represents, in its totality, approximately 4 days' wages for the average New York factory worker, served on one table on one evening. The dining room silver is being polished by James and the second footman. The crystal is being checked for spots. The tablecloth, a double damask 12 feet by 4, a single piece, no seams, has been pressed by Bridget since 8 this morning, which is why Bridget has been in the dining room since 8, and why the pressing iron smell is detectable on the second floor. Your work is Mrs. Harrington, always specifically Mrs. Harrington. The day of a dinner party in this house is organised around the hour of departure of the dressing room, which is 5 o'clock because the guests arrive at 7, and Mrs. Harrington needs 2 full hours. This means that the day before 5 o'clock must be managed to allow for 5 o'clock's requirements. She must rest between 3 and 5, which means the morning calls and the correspondence and whatever other business the day contains must be concluded by 3. This is not always easy. Today it is not easy because Mrs. Vanderberg arrives at noon for luncheon, and Mrs. Vanderberg does not operate on anyone's schedule but her own, and noon luncheon with Mrs. Vanderberg frequently extends into the 3 o'clock hour and sometimes beyond. You have prepared for this. You warned Mrs. Fenwick, who warned Cook, who has prepared a luncheon that is good but quick. 2 courses only, cold meats and a hot soup, bread and cheese, and you've prepared the dressing room at 9 in the morning rather than 4, everything laid out and ready, so that the 5 o'clock dressing can begin without preparation time. You have also, at 7 this morning, pressed tonight's gown, the ice blue silk from Redfern's. Not the Harrington signature French piece, but an English house's work, beautifully made, a slightly different silhouette from the Worth pieces, the bodice more upright, more architectural. Blue, not green. You pressed it with the window open, gloves on your hands, the steam going up and away from you into the October air outside. Mrs. Vanderberg arrives at noon. She is, as described, formidable, a small woman who gives the impression of size through sheer density of personality, dressed in black. She's been in half mourning since her son-in-law's business partner died 2 years ago, which is perhaps not technically required, but Mrs. Vanderberg respects the forms, all the time, with a magnificent set of black jet jewellery and a hat that a lesser woman could not carry. She kisses her daughter on both cheeks in the Dutch manner, looks around the front hall with the proprietary eye of someone assessing property that will eventually return to the family through the laws of sentiment if not of inheritance, and says, "The hall carpet is wrong." "Good morning, Mother." "It was wrong last time I was here. It's still wrong." She means the colour. It's a deep red Turkish runner, and she thinks it should be blue. She has thought this for 5 years. Where are we eating? The small dining room. The small dining room seats 8. For 12 tonight they're using the large dining room, but for 2 at luncheon the small dining room is correct. Warmer, more appropriate for the scale. You're not in the small dining room for lunch. You're in the dressing room, reviewing the evening arrangement for the 3rd time, checking pins and positions. Because when you have reviewed something twice and found it correct, the 3rd review is still warranted when the stakes are 12 guests and Mrs. Vanderberg's proprietary eye. You hear the luncheon through the house's acoustic system, the specific way sound travels in a large building through plaster and pipe and corridor, as a low continuous murmur overlaid with Mrs. Vanderberg's voice, which carries in the way of voices accustomed to being heard. What you piece together from the fragments is this. The luncheon lasts until 2:45, which is later than ideal but not catastrophic. Mrs. Vanderberg, over the course of 2.5 hours, covers the following topics: the inadequacy of the Vanderberg family's current position on the Metropolitan Opera Board. They should have a box. The Harringtons have a box. The arrangement is inequitable. The matter of the missing silver soup ladle from the Murray Hill house. She suspects the kitchen maid. The general decline of standards in New York society as represented by the recent elevation of several new money families to positions previously reserved for families of standing. She does not name the Harringtons, who are new money by her scale because they are family, and family operates on different arithmetic. Charlotte Reese's situation, which she describes with the bluntness of someone who has no patience for the softer framings, and the Sargent portrait question, about which she has opinions that she delivers without being asked. "He should paint you here," she says, "in this house, in the drawing room by the window, not in a studio. The house is part of what you are." "I've been thinking the same thing," says Mrs. Harrington. "He painted the Sitwell children in their own nursery. He does it when he's interested. The question is whether he'll be interested." A pause that contains its own editorial. "He's very selective." "I know." The Belmont woman sat for him 3 times before he agreed on the composition. Another pause. "She's a difficult woman, but she has good bones. He likes bones." "So do I," says Mrs. Harrington dryly. And this is the moment where you hear something in the luncheon that is not entirely composed. A short, genuine laugh from Mrs. Vanderberg, unexpected, a sound like a branch snapping in a still wood. By 3:15, Mrs. Vanderberg is in her carriage, and Mrs. Harrington is lying down, and you're making sure the dressing room is exactly right. She comes in at 5, she sits, the routine begins. Tonight you do the eyes. Not the belladonna. You've not restocked the belladonna in 3 weeks, and you've not been asked to restock it, and you've not volunteered the restock. But the careful powder work around the eyes, the definition of the brow bone, the faint darkening along the upper lid with the fine brush. The effect is not the same as the drops. It is more subtle, more controlled, more the thing itself rather than the pharmacological version. Her eyes are, in fact, extraordinary without the drops. They are dark and large, and the light in them at this hour, the soft dressing room light, is specific and genuine, unmediated. You notice this. You notice it the way you notice anything that represents a small improvement, a small relief, a small return in the direction of the person rather than the performance, the ice blue gown for tonight. You had anticipated the corset question and prepared the evening corset, the real one, 20 inches, and she puts it on with a familiar small exhalation and the steadying hand on the dressing table. The gown closes over it. 30 hooks tonight. Redfern's fastens differently from Worth, a slightly different spacing, a slightly different hook size, and you have recalibrated for it. You finish in 9 minutes, which is faster than your personal record of 11. The diamond parure tonight, because 12 guests, including the Vanderberg parents, requires the full expression of the Harrington position. The collar goes on, the earrings, the bracelet with its particular click of the clasp. Good, she says to the mirror. She turns left, turns right. The ice blue against the dark hair, the diamonds, the posture the corset enforces, and which she has inhabited so completely it no longer looks enforced. Very good. She looks at you in the mirror. You should have been a painter, she says, and then, before you can respond, she is turned and gone. You stand in the dressing room for a moment holding the closing hook. Then you put it in its drawer and go to have your supper in the servants' hall before the evening begins in earnest. The dinner party operates on 2 levels simultaneously, as dinner parties in great houses always do. The level above, the dining room, 12 people, the 8-course meal, the silver and crystal and damask, the conversation that is itself a performance requiring its own rehearsals and blocking. And the level below, the kitchen level, the servants' level, the invisible machinery that produces the visible event. You're not in the kitchen. You're not serving at table. That is Mr. Dawson and the footmen. Your position during a dinner party is the strange intermediate one of being necessary before and after the event but not during it, which means you spend approximately 4 hours in a state of prepared availability, dressed correctly, positioned on the 2nd floor, ready to appear at need, unlikely to be needed but unable to be elsewhere. You can hear the dinner. The house transmits it upward. The murmur of 12 voices, the sound of china, the specific percussion of the serving sequence, the occasional louder note that represents a story reaching its conclusion. You cannot hear the content. You hear the music of it, the social music, the sound of a room doing what it was built to do. At 9:15, James appears on the 2nd floor with a message. Mrs. Vanderberg has asked for her shawl, which she left in the hall. You retrieve it from the cloakroom and return it through James, and this is your participation in the dinner. At 11:45, the last carriage departs. You hear the front door, hear the house settle back into its post-guest quiet. Mr. Harrington's voice downstairs, brief, his particular register. Then the sound of the study door closing, which is what it does at the end of evenings when he goes to read, which is most evenings. Mrs. Harrington comes upstairs at midnight. You're in the dressing room, which you've been straightening and resetting for an hour. She comes in and sits, and there is about her the post-performance quality that you know. The slight deflation, not depression, but the specific relaxation of effort sustained. The machine at rest. The dinner was good. You can read this in her posture. Not triumphant, because triumph would be an excess of expression, but the quiet satisfaction of a competent professional at the end of a successfully executed project. Mr. Cabot was very entertaining, she says, while you work on the 30 hooks. He's just returned from Japan, she considers this. He brought back a very interesting description of the Meiji court, the formality, a pause. Rather like us, he said. In what sense, ma'am? The performance of it, the rules that govern everything. The last of the hooks. He meant it as a compliment. I'm not sure it was one. You begin on the hair. The pins counted out. 24 tonight. Duval had done the hair at 3, a more elaborate arrangement than usual for the dinner, requiring more structural support. He asked about the portrait, she says, whether Sergeant had agreed. Has he, ma'am? Not yet. She looks at herself in the mirror, the hair coming down now, pin by pin. I've written to him, through his London agent. It may take time, she pauses. He said he has 2 commissions ahead of mine if he agrees, and that he's very particular about the composition. You remove the last structural pin and the chignon releases. She reaches up and runs her fingers through the loosened hair, a gesture you've seen her make maybe 3 times in 14 months, private, unperformed, the gesture of someone touching something that belongs to them alone. He said, the agent's letter, she continues, that Mr. Sargent would want to spend a day in the house before agreeing, looking at the light. The light in the drawing room is very good in the afternoon, you say. She looks at you in the mirror. Yes, she says, it is. The night cream, the cleaned face, the folded gown, the lamp. Good night, Clara. Good night, Mum. The middle of November brings the cold properly, the specific cold of a New York November that is not yet December but has stopped pretending to be autumn. The avenue in the morning has frost on the pavement flags. The horses breathe steam. The coachmen wrap themselves in extra wool. The delivery boys on the street corners have their hands buried in their coat pockets between deliveries, because delivery boys do not get gloves, because gloves are a luxury, because in 1887 New York City approximately 30% of the working population lives in poverty, defined as the inability to meet basic caloric and shelter needs, and the question of gloves does not arise in that context. You have gloves. Your pair of black winter gloves that you brought from Poughkeepsie, which are slightly too thin for the real cold but sufficient for the November cold, and which you wear on your Thursday afternoons when you have 3 hours that are yours, and which you use to visit the bookshop on Greenwich Street, where the proprietor, Mr. Ashe, has by now learned your reading habits well enough to set things aside. Mr. Ashe is 60-something, wiry, with the specific intellectual enthusiasm of a man who has organised his life around books and is content with that organisation. His shop is crowded in the way of good bookshops, not disordered but dense, the shelves too full, the stacking floor to ceiling, the narrow aisles requiring a sideways approach for anyone wider than a violin case. It smells of paper and dust and the coal stove that sits in the back corner, and that Mr. Ashe feeds with the meticulous care of someone who knows exactly how much heat 3 hours of reading requires. He has set aside this Thursday a medical text and a newspaper pamphlet. The medical text is by a Dr. John Stevenson, published in London in 1883. Whitler's Dictionary of Treatment, a clinical reference that has a relevant section on arsenic poisoning. The pamphlet is from the New York Tribune, printed in October of this year, about a case in New Jersey in which a woman died of arsenical poisoning from her bedroom wallpaper, and the subsequent investigation by the State Board of Health. "Thought you'd want to see these," Mr. Ash says, without looking up from what he's repairing at the counter. He does not ask why you want to see them. This is one of the things you appreciate about Mr. Ash. You sit in the chair near the stove with the pamphlet first because the pamphlet is shorter. The New Jersey case. A woman named Mrs. Ellen Harrison of Newark, 44, whose bedroom was repapered in 1884, who began experiencing headaches and gastric distress in 1885, who was treated by her doctor for nervous debility and female weakness through 1886, and who died in March of 1887 following an acute episode of arsenic poisoning confirmed by post-mortem chemical analysis. The wallpaper was found to contain Scheele's green at a concentration of 43 grains per square foot. Her bedroom was 12 by 14 feet. She had slept in that room for 3 years, 43 grains per square foot. You look at this number. You think about the wallpaper in the bedroom at 327 Fifth Avenue. You think about how you would measure grains per square foot. You think about 3 years. You read the Dr. Stevenson text next, the relevant section. Chronic arsenical poisoning, cumulative rather than acute, presenting with symptoms easily attributable to other causes, fatigue, headache, gastric disturbance, pallor, peripheral neuropathy in the extremities presenting as greyish discoloration of the skin, particularly at the fingertips. The body accumulates arsenic in the hair and nails and bone at a rate that exceeds its ability to excrete it. Long-term exposure produces systemic effects. The clinical picture is, without chemical analysis, difficult to distinguish from several common conditions. Difficult to distinguish without chemical analysis. Your fingertips, grey. You fold the pamphlet very carefully. You buy both items, 4 cents for the pamphlet, 30 cents for the text, which is more than you usually spend, which you do not hesitate about. And you put them in your coat pocket and you walk back up to Fifth Avenue in the November cold. You have a theory. The theory has been assembling for 6 months, piece by piece, and this afternoon it has arrived at a point where it is no longer a theory, but something more like a conclusion. Mrs. Harrington is being poisoned by her bedroom. The green wallpaper in the room she slept in for 3 years is releasing arsenic into the air at a rate sufficient to explain the pallor, the headaches, the thinning face, the persistent fatigue that sleep does not address. The corset is compressing her ability to breathe adequately. The belladonna was compromising her vision and her autonomic nervous system. The powders were adding a chronic low-level exposure to bismuth and residual lead compounds. The patent headache medicine was administering opium 4 times a week to mask the symptoms of a system that was being gradually overwhelmed. None of these things is enough, alone, to kill her. Together, accumulated, they constitute a machine whose product is the slow deterioration of the health of the woman at its centre. And the woman at its centre has no way to see the machine from inside it. And the doctor who attends her does not read German. And the fashion press celebrates the pallor. And the wallpaper was chosen from a sample book in 1883. Because the green was exactly right. You walk up Fifth Avenue with this in your coat pocket. What are you going to do with it? This is the question that has been waiting underneath the pamphlets and the medical text and the 6 months of observation. What you can do and what you are is not a simple equation. You are the lady's maid. You have in the calculus of this house approximately the social standing of the dressing table: essential, present, invisible, not consulted. The information you carry is real and specific and substantiated. The standing from which to deliver it is, what exactly? A 22-year-old woman from Poughkeepsie with a second-hand pamphlet and a second-hand medical text. A servant. And yet the dress is in the cedar chest. Because something you did. Not the pamphlet, not the information, but the 14 months of careful, silent presence. The way you look at her in the mirror in a particular way that she has apparently been reading. Because something shifted, and the dress is in the cedar chest. You turn this over as you walk. The bare trees, the frost on the stone, the horses breathing steam, the mansions behind their iron railings, their upper windows lit for the afternoon, the drawing rooms visible through the glass in the afternoon light, the figures moving in them, the social machinery operating at its regular tempo. The wallpaper is different. The wallpaper is not a dress she can put in a cedar chest on her own authority. The wallpaper requires, what? A conversation with Mr. Harrington, who chose the wallpaper, who is a man of the period and of the type, and who has a Madison Avenue doctor he trusts, and a study full of reports from railroads that concern him, and who has never, in your observation, discussed the bedroom decor with anyone. A conversation with the doctor, who does not read German and who drives a good carriage. A conversation with someone who has standing. You do not have standing, but you have the next best thing, which is the ear of a woman who has standing, who trusts you in the specific way that someone trusts the person who is closest to their face every morning, which is a kind of trust that does not have a name in the social vocabulary of the period, but which is real and exerts a real force. You have, also, the fact of Charlotte Reese and the Pierce girl and the Newark woman who died in March and the pamphlet from the Massachusetts Board of Health and the section in Dr. Stevenson's text and your grey fingertips and 14 months of careful, quiet observation of the slow change in a face you look at in a mirror every morning for 2 hours. You have enough. The question is how. You go back to the house. You go up the back stairs, you make the dressing room ready for the evening, and you wait for the right moment, which in the life of a lady's maid is a concept requiring both patience and precision, the patience of someone who has learned to read the room, and the precision of someone who knows that the wrong moment closes the door permanently. The right moment does not come that evening or the next. It comes 4 days later on a Saturday morning, when Mrs. Harrington wakes earlier than usual, at 6:45, which means you find her already sitting up in bed when you bring the tray at 7, and when the quality of the morning is different in a way you've learned to read. She has not slept well. Her face is very pale, the yellow undertone pronounced, and there is something in her eyes that is not the pleasant impersonality of the morning, but something rawer, closer to the surface. You set the tray, you check the fire, you begin the small quiet movements of the routine. She pours her own coffee. "I had a dream," she says. She doesn't usually say this. She doesn't usually say anything before the coffee has been drunk. About this room. You wait. It was the same room, but wrong. She looks at the walls, the green walls. Something about the colour. You stand very still. I dreamed the colour was coming off the walls, like mist, just drifting. She looks at her coffee cup. Strange. The silence in the room has a quality. You're aware of your own heartbeat. "Ma'am," you say. Your voice is level. You've been practicing this in the dark for weeks. The level voice, the right words in the right order. May I say something? She looks at you. The searching look, the one she used in the drawing room 3 weeks ago. Say it, she says. The wallpaper, you say. And then you say the rest of it. Not all of it. Not the Newark woman who died. Not the 43 grains per square foot. Because those are details that require a preceding argument, and you have seconds, not minutes, for the preceding argument, but the essential thing. The green, the dye, the compound, the way the damp releases it, the headaches that began in 1885, the November of 1884 when the room was newly papered and the weather was wet and the compound would have been releasing at its highest concentration. The paper new, the concentration undiminished. You say it in 40 seconds, standing by the dressing table with your hands at your sides, looking at her and not at the walls, because the walls are the thing you're talking about and looking at them would be too much. She is very still through the 40 seconds. She does not interrupt. Her face does not show what it is doing inside itself, because her face has been trained since she was 18 to not show what it is doing inside itself. And 31 years of discipline holds even in a room in which the walls are perhaps slowly doing something terrible. When you stop, she is quiet for perhaps 10 full seconds. Where did you read this? She says. A pamphlet from Massachusetts, and a medical text. I can bring them. Yes, she says, bring them. You go to your room. You get the pamphlet and the Dr. Stevenson text from under the spare petticoat. You bring them to the bedroom. You hand them to her. You stand. She reads. She's a fast reader. You've seen her read correspondence, and she processes it at a rate that suggests real education, the kind of reading practice that comes from having read widely and seriously, which is not universal in the world she inhabits. She reads the pamphlet in its entirety. She reads the relevant section of the medical text. She reads the description of chronic arsenical poisoning, the headaches, the gastric disturbance, the pallor, the fingertip discoloration. She reads it without expression. When she finishes, she sets both documents on the tray beside her coffee cup and looks at the wall. 3 years, she says. Yes, ma'am. Since 84. She's doing arithmetic, the quiet kind, the private kind. The summer of 85 I was unwell, in Newport. She pauses. I felt better in Newport. Newport, where there was no green wallpaper. Newport, where she spent 6 weeks and felt better, and came back to the Fifth Avenue house and felt worse again. Yes, ma'am, you say. You don't say, I know. You don't say, I work this out. You simply confirm with the single syllable the thing she's arriving at, because it is important that she arrive at it herself. She looks at the walls for a long time, the morning light on the green, the specific, saturated green, the colour that was exactly right. Frederick chose this paper, she says, not accusing, informational. Yes, ma'am, I believe so. He'll need to see these. She means the documents. And Dr. Whitmore, not her Madison Avenue doctor, not the one with the good carriage. Dr. Whitmore is a name you've heard once in the drawing room from Mrs. Vanderberg, the English physician she mentioned, the one who reads the German research. Yes, ma'am. I'll have Mrs. Fenwick move me to the guest suite this afternoon. She picks up her coffee cup. The one at the back of the house, the yellow room. She drinks. Her face has the composure of someone who has received difficult information and processed it with the efficiency of a competent professional, which is what she is. And the room around her is the same room it has always been. The green walls, the green ceiling, the morning light filtering through the curtains, and it is all suddenly, precisely, different. Clara. Ma'am? How long have you known? You look at her. She looks at you. The truth, in this room, this morning. seems to be the only possible currency. 6 months, you say. Another silence. Longer this time. Something moves through her face. Not anger, something more complex. Something that contains gratitude and frustration, and the specific difficulty of being a person who was protected from information by the structure of a world that told you protection was what you needed. 6 months, she says. I didn't have standing, you say. It is the most honest sentence you have said in 14 months in this house. I tried to think of the right way. I'm sorry it took so long. She sets down the cup. She looks at the window. No, she says. You've done something very difficult. A pause. In a position where it would have been easier not to. You don't know what to say to this. You say nothing. The room is very quiet. The belladonna bottle, she says. The one you haven't restocked. No, ma'am. Did you read about that too? Yes, ma'am. She's quiet for another moment. Then, unexpectedly, she makes a sound that is not quite a laugh. Something between a laugh and the other thing. The thing that is not performed. The thing that escapes before the 12-second adjustment catches it. Well, she says, I suppose I have been rather thoroughly looked after. She picks up the pamphlet. She looks at the cover. Massachusetts Board of Health. How much did this cost? 3 cents, Mum. 3 cents. She sets it down. I'll pay you back. It was my pleasure, Ma'am. No, it wasn't. She looks at you. The most direct she has looked at you, perhaps, since you arrived. But thank you for saying so. The morning routine that day happens in the guest suite at the back of the house, a room with cream walls and yellow silk curtains and a smell of cedar and disuse that gives way quickly to the familiar smell of the dressing table, which you have moved in its entirety while Mrs. Harrington is at breakfast. The room will need to be properly prepared. This is a project for Mrs. Fenwick and the housemaids. But the immediate essentials are here, the dressing table and the mirror and the bottles in their places. You press the day dress in the back bedroom with the window open and your hands in cotton gloves and you are breathing cold November air and it is fine. Mr. Harrington, this is the next thing and it is not your territory and you are not present for it, which is correct. You know it happens because you see the study door close at 10 in the morning when he is normally in his office on Wall Street, and you see Mrs. Fenwick pass twice along the second-floor hall with the particular expression of a senior servant during a domestic situation requiring navigation, and you hear, faintly through the pipes and plaster, not words but the bass register of voices in the study. And by noon the result is the following observable facts. Mrs. Harrington's dressing room is being prepared in the guest suite on a permanent basis, the Yellow Room. A note has been sent to a Dr. Edwin Whitmore at his consulting rooms on Madison Avenue. Not the same Madison Avenue doctor, a different one, the English one who reads German, who is, as it transpires, establishing a practice here and has been in New York for 8 months. And the house painter has been sent for to remove the wallpaper from what was Mrs. Harrington's bedroom and repaper it in a cream ground with a botanical design whose dye compounds have been specified by Dr. Whitmore as arsenical-free. The house painter arrives on a Wednesday. In the servants' hall that evening, the removal of the wallpaper is the subject of significant discussion, because information travels in this house the way information travels in all houses, which is through pipes and plasters, and the overheard half of conversations and the expression on Mrs. Fenwick's face during lunch. Bridget has a theory. She thinks it's mould behind the paper, because she once worked in a house in Gramercy Park where mould was found behind wallpaper and the whole second floor had to be redone. Nora thinks it's fashion, that the green is simply out of fashion, and Mrs. Harrington wants the cream. James, who is 17 and inclined to the dramatic, Says he heard the paper was poisonous, at which point Bridget tells him not to be an idiot and the conversation moves on. You eat your mutton and say nothing. You note that your greyish fingertips look this morning and again this evening approximately the same shade as they have looked for months. You make a note to ask Dr. Whitmore when he comes to the house whether this is reversible. You note this in the small notebook between the notation about the ivory coat shoulder seam and the notation about Mr. Dawson's preference for the diamond box to be replaced in the safe by 10:30 in the evening. Dr. Edwin Whitmore arrives at the house on the Friday of that week. He is 45, medium height, with a neatness that suggests a man who is precise about things without making an exhibition of the precision. He has an English medical degree and 2 years of work in Germany, which is where the research on arsenical compounds is most advanced, and he has been in New York since March as part of a professional interest in the management of what he calls environmental disease. Illness produced not by contagion or constitution, but by the physical environment the patient inhabits. He is not fashionable. His practice is small. He does not drive a particularly notable carriage. He spends an hour with Mrs. Harrington. He asks questions you do not hear. The consultation is in the drawing room with the door closed, and you are on the second floor during it, waiting. When he comes out, he asks to speak to you. This is unusual. In 14 months in this house, a doctor has never asked to speak to you. He stands in the second floor hall and looks at you with the direct attention of a man who is interested in information and not particularly occupied with hierarchy. "You're the lady's maid," he says. "Yes, sir." "Mrs. Harrington tells me you identified the wallpaper problem." "Yes, sir." "She said you'd been reading." He looks at your hands, which are folded in front of you in the correct position for a servant receiving a question from a superior. Then he says, "Show me your hands, please." You show him your hands. He looks at your fingertips. He looks for approximately 15 seconds without touching them. Then he says, "Turn them over." You turn them. The palms are normal. The backs are normal. The greyness is specifically at the tips. "How long have you had this?" "Approximately 6 months, sir. Perhaps a little longer." "Do you have symptoms?" "Headaches. Fatigue." "The headaches I attributed to tiredness, sir. The fatigue also." "Peripheral tingling in the hands at night?" You think about this. The tingling, which you've been experiencing intermittently for perhaps 3 months, and which you attributed to sleeping on your arm. "Sometimes." "Yes." He nods. He looks at his notes. "I'd like to examine you. Not today. I have another appointment. But next week, if Mrs. Harrington agrees to the use of her house for the purpose." He says this matter-of-factly, as if it is a normal thing to say, which, in the world of 1887 medical practice relative to servants, it is not. Examining a servant at the employer's expense is a considerable departure from the norm. "I'm sure that's at Mrs. Harrington's discretion, sir," you say. "I'll speak with her." He caps his pen. The removal of the wallpaper was the right decision. The symptoms should improve significantly without the primary exposure source. The secondary sources, the dye compounds in the fabrics. "I'll discuss with Mrs. Harrington. There are alternatives now that weren't available 5 years ago." He looks at you again. You did something important, in a position where it was not straightforward to do it. "I should have done it sooner," you say. He considers this. "Perhaps. But you did it when you could." He picks up his bag. "I'll see myself out." He goes. You stand in the second floor hall for a moment. The house around you has its usual sounds. The kitchen below, the street outside, the pipes, the house breathing its building breath. The green wallpaper is coming off the bedroom walls on Tuesday. The guest suite has cream walls and yellow curtains and no arsenical compounds. The blue belladonna bottle has not been restocked in 4 weeks and will not be restocked. Small corrections. The system is large and the corrections are small, but they are corrections and they are happening, and you made them happen from a position with approximately 0 official authority and 3 cents worth of pamphlet from a second-hand bookshop on Greenwich Street. And this, you think, standing in the second-floor hall of a mansion on Fifth Avenue in the second year of the reign of Grover Cleveland in the approximate middle of the Gilded Age, is perhaps enough for a Thursday. Not all of it, not most of it, but enough. You go back to the dressing room and count the pins. December arrives like a formal announcement. The city shifts in quality. The cold becomes absolute. The sky takes on the specific clarity of winter in a northern city. The kind of clarity that makes everything look more itself, more defined. The buildings sharper and the people smaller against them. Fifth Avenue in December is hung with evergreen boughs by the households that do it, and ignored by the households that consider it ostentatious, which is a social division with its own precise geography. The older money tends toward restraint, the newer money toward elaboration, and the Harrington house, which is new money presenting as established money, occupies a careful middle position. A wreath on the door, clean and classic, no excess. The social season at its height requires the dressing room to be operating at maximum efficiency. In the first 3 weeks of December there are 2 major balls, a series of dinners, the opera 3 times, 2 concerts at Carnegie Hall, a charity event at the Academy of Design, and the series of morning calls that expand rather than contract as the season deepens, because the approaching holidays create their own social calendar of obligations and reciprocities that must be managed with the same precision as the summer's departure had to be managed in reverse. You manage it. The mornings follow their sequence. The hair appointments with Duval on the days before major events. The gowns pressed and prepared, the blue silk, the ivory taffeta that came from Redfern's in a trunk last week and is magnificent. The wine velvet that is being altered at the waist because 6 weeks of no belladonna and better sleep have produced a very slight change in the body that requires an adjustment of 3/8 of an inch at the left side seam. 3/8 of an inch. You noted it in the morning of the second week in November, felt it in the hook and eye, verified it by measurement. You brought it to Madame Ellison. She looked at you across the work table and said nothing at all and altered the seam. 3/8 of an inch. It is not nothing. Dr. Whitmore examined you on a Wednesday afternoon in mid-November in the front parlour of the house, with Mrs. Harrington absent by arrangement. The examination is brief and thorough, and conducted with the clinical matter-of-factness of a man who is interested in the case, rather than the social strangeness of the case, which makes it easier to participate in. He asks about diet, sleep, the nature of your work, the specific substances you handle regularly. He takes samples of your hair, a lock from behind the ear, cut with small scissors, which he tells you he will send to a laboratory for analysis, because arsenic deposits in hair at a rate that allows for a timeline of exposure. He will know from the hair sample approximately when the exposure intensified, and at what level. The fingertip discoloration, he says, is Mees lines, what we sometimes call Aldrich-Mees lines in the nail bed combined with melanosis of the permaskin. It's the body's attempt to sequester the arsenic in the keratin-rich tissue. It's not immediately dangerous, but it's diagnostically significant. Is it reversible, you say? The external presentation largely resolves with cessation of exposure. The internal accumulation clears more slowly. The half-life in tissue is measured in months, but yes, largely reversible. He makes a note. Stop handling the green dress. I understand it's in storage. The cedar chest, sir. Leave it there, indefinitely. If Mrs. Harrington asks for it, I'll speak with her. He caps his pen. And the pressing gloves. Continue with those for any dyed fabrics. Open windows. It's good practice. He looks at his notes. You're in good health otherwise. Young and reasonably robust. Your body has been managing the exposure better than some would. The fatigue and headaches should improve significantly. They do improve. Not immediately. The body doesn't work immediately. But in the weeks that follow, you begin to notice the difference, the way you notice a sound stopping. The sound you'd been hearing so long it had become part of the background, and its absence feels like a new kind of quiet. You are less tired. Not entirely not tired. You are a lady's maid who works 16-hour days. Some degree of tiredness is not optional. But the particular deep fatigue, the fatigue that sleep didn't address, begins to lift. The headaches, which you'd been attributing to tiredness and the smell of the dressing room, diminish in frequency. Your fingertips are still grey. But Dr. Whitmore said that takes months. In the second week of December, a letter arrives at the house addressed to Mrs. Frederick Harrington from London, from the agent of Mr. John Singer Sargent. You're not present when she reads it, but you know she has read it, because at 3 o'clock she comes to the dressing room and says, with an expression that is very nearly unguarded, "He's agreed. He'll come to the house in February." "That's wonderful news, ma'am." "He wants to see the light in the drawing room." She looks out the dressing room window. "In February? I've told him the light is better in the afternoon." "The afternoon light in the drawing room is very good," you say again, as you said before. She looks at you. The same look she had in the bedroom on the morning of the wallpaper conversation. Direct. Searching. The look that is reading something written in small text. "You know this house better than I do," she says. "In some ways." You consider how to answer this. "I know it differently, ma'am," she nods. This is an answer she accepts. The ball on December the 14th is the Harrington Ball. This is the significant social event of the Harrington year. The event toward which the whole social machinery of the household has been building since October, the event that requires the full expression of everything the house and the woman who lives in it can produce. 160 guests. The ballroom on the 3rd floor, which is used for this purpose twice a year and for nothing else. The orchestra, 6 musicians, a proper society dance orchestra, not a quartet, set up in the alcove at the north end. The supper room prepared with enough food to constitute, by approximate estimation, 3 months of cook's usual budget served over the course of 4 hours. The flowers, which come from a greenhouse in New Jersey and cost $30, which is more than you earn in a month, and which are arranged by a florist who arrives in the afternoon with 3 assistants, and who is finished by 5. You are in the dressing room from 2 in the afternoon. There is no other place to be. The evening gown for the ball is the ivory taffeta from Redfern's. Ivory, the colour of cream and old lace, of wealth sophisticated enough to know that white is too simple, and gold is too obvious, and ivory occupies the precise middle ground between restraint and extravagance. The gown has an extraordinary neckline, deeply cut in the front and the back, with a ruched edge of the same ivory taffeta, and at the neckline and along the hem there is embroidery in seed pearl and silver thread that catches light the way nothing else catches light. the way small moving points of white and silver in a gaslit room create their own particular kind of incandescence. Duval comes at 3 and works until 5 and produces a construction of Mrs. Harrington's hair that is genuinely one of the finest things you've seen in 14 months. The chignon larger tonight, the front dressed in soft waves that are then pinned with a spray of small diamonds, not the Harrington parure, which is too heavy for this gown, but a set of small spray pins, 9 of them, scattered through the front hair like court light. The corset, 20 inches, the exhalation, the steadying hand, the gown. Not 32 hooks, but 40 tonight. The ball gown closes with 40 hooks, each one small and silver, and you do them in 11 minutes, which is a personal record because you've been practicing the angle of approach since the gown arrived. The jewellery. The small diamond spray pins are already in the hair, at the neck tonight. Not the diamond collar, but a simpler piece. A single strand of pearls with a diamond clasp. 3 rows, which against the ivory taffeta and the deep neckline is exactly right, is more right than the collar would be, because the collar would compete with the neckline, and the neckline has won the argument already. The pearl bracelet, the small diamond earrings, the simple drop. You step back. You look. 160 guests are going to arrive at this house in the next 2 hours, and they're going to see this woman at the top of the stairs in this room that has been prepared for this evening. The flowers, the candles, the orchestra tuning in the alcove, and the word that will travel through the drawing rooms of New York society on the morning after the ball, the word that will appear in the Tribune Society column on Saturday and in Harper's Bazaar's report next month. The word is magnificent. You know this because you have been looking at her for 14 months in every configuration the day produces, and magnificent is the right word, and you are the person who produced it. You're also the person who hasn't slept more than 6 hours in 14 months, whose fingertips are grey, who spent an afternoon in November sitting by a coal stove in a second-hand bookshop, reading a medical text about arsenic, who laces a corset 20 inches on a 31-year-old body every evening. These 2 things are the same job, and they are both true. "Clara," she says. "Ma'am." She's looking in the long mirror, the completed picture, and there is something in her face that is not quite the assessing look, not quite the unguarded look, something between. Something that is looking at the person in the mirror and knowing that person fully, the construction and the woman inside the construction, both at once. "The sergeant portrait," she says, "when he comes in February. I want you there." You look at her. "In the house, ma'am?" "In the room," when he looks at the light. She turns slightly from the mirror. You know the light. You know the light. In the drawing room, in the afternoon, the light comes from the west-facing windows and lands at an angle across the fireplace wall, the Flemish tapestry, the settee by the window, and on the person sitting by the window at that hour. It lands in a specific way that does something to the quality of the face, something honest, something that does not flatter in the conventional sense, but that shows the thing clearly, the actual thing, which is perhaps the same as flattery if the thing is worth showing. "Yes, ma'am," you say. "I'll be there." She nods, the single small nod. She turns back to the mirror for one last look, and then she is Mrs. Frederick Harrington, and the ball is beginning, and the sound of the orchestra tuning up comes through the floor from 3 stories above. The specific sound of strings and preparation, and the imminent beginning of a performance. And she goes. The ball runs until 2 in the morning. You know this from the sounds, the music, which you can hear from the second floor, The orchestrated rhythm of the evening moving through its phases, the dancing hours and the supper hour and the late hour dancing when the numbers have thinned, and the guests who remain are the ones who dance rather than the ones who appear at events, a different subset, and the quality of the music shifts accordingly, becomes a little less formal, a little more alive. You're on the second floor all evening, in the prepared availability position. You're called twice. Once at 9:15 when Mrs. Whittaker, having moved too vigorously in the gallop, requires a pin in the back of her gown which has come loose, and you repair it in 90 seconds in the anteroom off the landing. And once at 11 when Miss Gertrude Haverford, the 20-year-old with the ivory trim problem, has a more serious situation. Her hair has partially collapsed during the quadrille, the chignon structure giving way at a key point, and she is nearly in tears in the ladies' withdrawing room when you arrive. You repair her hair in 8 minutes. It takes longer because Duval did not do it. She arrived with a hair arrangement done by her own maid, who is newer to the work and who placed a structural pin incorrectly. And you have to work with someone else's architecture, which is always harder than starting clean. But you do it. The chignon holds. She looks, when you step back, correct. She looks actually better than when she arrived, because the repair required removing the incorrect structural pin and replacing it, which in the process corrected a slight asymmetry in the original arrangement. "Oh," she says, looking in the withdrawing room mirror. "Oh, it's much better. You look very well, Miss Haverford." She looks at you with the slightly overwhelmed expression of someone who's just avoided a significant embarrassment. "Thank you. What is your name?" "Clara Moss. Miss Moss. Thank you." She looks at the mirror again, reassured. "How did you do that so quickly?" "Practice," you say. She laughs, a genuine sound, the laugh of a young woman whose social crisis has been averted and who is relieved enough to be genuinely funny. "I suppose that's the answer to everything." "Most things," you say. She goes back to the ball. You return to the second floor. You sit in the chair in the anteroom with a lamp and the Dr. Stevenson text, which you have been working through at the rate of about 20 pages a week, and you read for the next 2 hours while the orchestra plays in the room above and the ball moves through its late hours, the guests departing in carriages below, the sound of the city's working night, the distant L train, the horse on the stone, the occasional voice, mixing with the music from the third floor. At 2:15 the music stops. At 2:30 the last carriage departs. At 2:50 Mrs. Harrington comes to the dressing room. You are there. You are always there. The unhooking of 40 hooks, the unlacing of the corset, the long exhalation that tonight is longer than usual, the body's relief after 6 hours of formal constriction, a sound with real depth to it, the sound of someone putting down something very heavy. You smooth the corset cover, you lift the taffeta gown from her shoulders, taking its 40 pounds carefully, carrying it to the form. She sits at the dressing table in her corset cover and robe, and you begin on the hair. The diamond spray pins first, 9 of them counted onto the pin tray. Then the structural pins of the chignon, 31 tonight, Duval's most elaborate arrangement. The hair falls. She puts her hands in it, the same private gesture, 2 hands in the loosened hair. She looks at herself in the mirror. The face without the powder is not the face in the portrait. It is older, more specific, the particular face of this person rather than the general face of the type. There are lines at the outer corners of the eyes that are not there in the fully made-up version. The skin is genuine skin, not the corrected surface. The cheekbone shadow is still there, but less pronounced than it was 2 months ago. Dr. Whitmore's yellow room. 6 weeks better sleep. 3/8 of an inch. 163 guests, she says. Is that more than last year, Ma'am? By 11. She looks at her face in the mirror with the look that is not quite the assessing look, and not quite the other thing. I kept thinking about the portrait. Where he would stand, what he would look for. She's quiet for a moment. What do you think he'll see? You're removing the last of the structural pins. You look at her face in the mirror. The genuine face. The late-night face. The face at the end of the effort. The true thing, you say. I think he sees the true thing. She's quiet for a long time. Long enough that you have finished the last pin and begun the night cream. Long enough that the house has settled around the end of its enormous evening. The kitchen quiet below. The florist's flowers wilting slightly in the vases. The orchestra long gone. The ballroom dark. The green room, she says finally. They started the paper removal today. Yes, Ma'am, I saw them in the hall. There's a layer underneath, she pauses. Under the green, an older paper, blue apparently with a white stripe. Frederick says his mother chose it. When the house was first decorated. She looks at the mirror, blue and white, under all that green. She says this in the tone of a person discovering something about a house they thought they knew completely. I didn't know it was there. Things are often there, you say, under the surface. She looks at you in the mirror. Yes, she says, they are. The night cream, the face clean, the lamp extinguished. Good night, good night.